The story begins with the main character explaining that 10 years from now, in the Eastern Allied Kingdoms, by the hands of the five great sins, this place will be brutally destroyed, so to prevent the impending disaster, he chose to become their sponsor. He admits he never imagined it would spiral into something this massive. Once chained to a desk, clocking in 78-hour workweeks at a no-name company, he now lived as a noble in a fantasy realm. He says it sounded like a decent trade-off, and it was. The scene shifts to him holding a book upside down, squinting at the incomprehensible text and murmuring in confusion about its meaning. He questions why the words are gibberish and wonders aloud why he didn't get an automatic translation buff after being isekai'd. His butler, quietly observing, finally points out that the book is upside down. He continues narrating his predicament. On top of it all, he says that his defining character trait is complete illiteracy. No magic powers, no advantages, nothing. As he explains this, one of the maids gently asks if he's done with his meal and offers assistance with his bath before bed. The setting shifts again. Two maids help him wash in an ornate bath, and the main character silently revels in the moment. He reflects that this, right here, a gorgeous maid feeding him while another washes his back, is what true luxury feels like. Besides having no idea where exactly he's landed, everything else seems perfect. One maid reminds him that since the other young masters will return tomorrow, he should get some rest. That piques his curiosity. He asks who those young masters are. She answers that they are young Master Leo and young Master Tonio. Another maid chimes in, saying they are members of the prestigious Palladio family. At the sound of that name, his thoughts stall. The mention of the Palladio family rings disturbingly familiar. His mind kicks into overdrive, and without warning, he dunks his face into the bathwater in a panic. The two maids react with alarm, horrified as bubbles rise from the surface. That's when it hits him, something awful. He might be in psychedelia. The narrative shifts. He recalls psychedelia, the world he used to know so well back when he was still a corporate drone, squeezing in brief moments to play games. Psychedelia was a turn-based RPG he often enjoyed. No matter what choices the player made, five great sins would always unfold. Wrath, greed, obsession, sloth, and pride. One by one, the kingdom, its nobles, and cities would spiral toward destruction. Of all the noble houses, none was as notorious as the Palladio family. Within it lived two infamous heirs. Leo Palladio, the king of debauchery. Tonio Palladio, the king of narcotics. The two were sleazy side characters, showing up briefly in an optional quest before the main storyline even began. The story then flashes back to his arrival in this world. He remembers the moment clearly and realizes he'd seen this place before. Details of the game flood back, especially the side quest named Investigate the Palladio County of the Asteria Kingdom. The mission focused on a seedy prostitution and drug ring called Avalon. Standing in the sprawling mansion, he can feel something sinister in the air. He starts to wonder if this is really happening, and the truth slowly clicks into place. Of all the possible starting points, he's landed in Palladio County, the very first noble family to be completely wiped out by the five sins. He remembers those sub-quests well. They gave ridiculous amounts of experience points in the game. And then it hits him in full. In this world, he is Alon Palladio, the third son of the Palladio family, a minor villain in the story. He lies in his ornate bed, tears silently streaking down his cheeks, wishing more than anything that he could go back to being an overworked corporate drone. Even 78 hours a week felt better than this. To him, the luxury around him means nothing, not with a death sentence hanging over him. He's consumed by dread. This, he thinks, is worse than the time his paycheck was withheld for 6 months. His chest tightens with hopelessness. He wonders how he ended up as a transmigrator without a single special advantage. He mutters bitterly to himself, lamenting how every other protagonist gets cheats, power-ups, some kind of edge, yet he got nothing. Then, all at once, a realization dawned on him. A special perk, of course. Knowing the game's events 10 years ahead was as good as knowing the future itself. He jolted upright in bed, his despair melting into a steely determination. If he possessed knowledge of what lay ahead, then all he had to do was remove the seeds of catastrophe before they could bloom. If he wanted to secure a comfortable life as a noble, he would have to dismantle the 5 great sins. He told himself that since the others were still just children, it should be possible to alter their destinies. Despite his own complete lack of power. Time advanced, and 2 months later, the scene shifted again. Alan's personal knight, Evan, appeared before him. Evan reported that he had successfully rescued the orphans from the Eastern Orphanage, a place that had, in truth, been used for human experimentation. He explained that a girl named Yusha had been appointed to oversee the orphanage's operations, praising her competence and saying that she was more than capable. Alan gave a calm nod. Evan hesitated, asking whether that was meant to be a compliment, since his lord's expression remained as unreadable as ever. Alan agreed that it was hard to tell, then gave him a rare, strained smile and said he was counting on him. The sudden smile left Evan unsettled. He muttered that he might never get used to seeing such an expression again. His thoughts drifted to the past, when Alan's face had been far more expressive. Meanwhile, Alan looked into a nearby mirror, stretching his facial muscles. He quietly noted that it still felt like the soul inside him hadn't fully connected with the body's expressions. Evan exhaled and thanked him once more for the kind words. Alan silently reflected that in a world like Psychedelia, where betrayal was routine, Evan was one of the few dependable allies who never strayed. That unwavering loyalty was exactly why Alan had recruited him the moment he found him. Evan soon shifted the conversation, reminding Alan that the recent raid had been launched to rescue the girl named Yusha. Alan confirmed this with a nod. Evan admitted that he understood why his lord had placed such trust in her. Even after all his years as a mercenary, he insisted that there was something unusual about that child. Her strength was unmatched, and it baffled him that someone like her had remained quietly imprisoned. He recommended bringing her to the mansion, arguing that there was no benefit in leaving her behind. Alan acknowledged that Evan's reasoning was sound, but deep down, he knew there was more to it. While it looked like he was underutilizing her, keeping her where she was fit into a broader plan, he began to explain. Yusha Bloodia, he said, belonged to the monstrous Blood Clan, a lineage bound by a contract with an incomprehensible otherworldly force. In the game, she would go on to become the Sin of Wrath, one of the 5 great sins. She would become a beast responsible for the deaths of hundreds of thousands. But Alan believed that if she was raised in a stable, peaceful setting, her fate could be altered. He felt a flicker of pride. He had just defused his first ticking time bomb. The reason he had left her behind was to observe her, to evaluate her stability and power. With a cold, serious tone, he cleared his throat and stated that such was the situation, though he added that the time had not yet come. Evan was taken aback, echoing his lord's words in disbelief. Alan then instructed him to ensure that the details of the mission never left the room, and that the orphans were well provided for. Evan bowed and confirmed he understood. Alan then handed him a sealed envelope, instructing him to deliver it to Yusha. When Evan asked if the letter contained something critical, Alan explained that it was a letter of greeting, meant to help soothe her after the trauma of the experiments. Evan blinked, surprised that his lord would go so far. He promised to deliver the letter without fail. Once Evan had left, Alan leaned back, deep in thought. He didn't know if the letter would actually calm her, but he felt he had to make the effort. Hidden in the pleasantries was a deeper message, a key phrase he had encountered repeatedly across his countless playthroughs. He recalled a particular scene from the game, where the Archbishop had delivered a desperate plea to the Sin of Wrath. The memory surfaced clearly. The Archbishop had shouted, his voice trembling as he recited the words. Darkness is an affliction, light is tranquility. A single hope in its belongings. It was a spell of sorts. A ritual phrase meant to soothe a monster born of rage. He remembered it appearing in the storyline during Yusha's transformation. A quick scene flashed in his memory. Yusha Bloodia, consumed by fury, slicing through crowds, blood drenching the stone floor. In the game, that was the moment the spell failed and combat began. But here, 10 years before those events, he believed there was still a chance to steer things differently. He exhaled slowly. One sin had been addressed. Now he had to decide who would be next. Trying to tame a monster with a single sentence sounded absurd. Yet, considering her clan's devotion to a bizarre, unknowable deity, it just might work. The thoughts of those who lived through fanaticism were impossible to rationalize. The perspective shifted to Yusha herself, quietly reading the letter Alon had sent. Evan stood rigid, sweat beading down his back. The oppressive demonic energy radiating from the girl was still heavy in the air. She looked unnatural, emotionless and unreadable. With cold intensity in her eyes, she mentioned that the letter had come from Lord Alon, then questioned why he hadn't summoned her personally. Evan froze, his breath caught in his throat. The ability to perceive demonic energy wasn't common, only those at a master's level could manage it. That realization unsettled him deeply. He stuttered a reply, repeating Alan's explanation that the time simply wasn't right. She lowered her gaze slightly and accepted the answer with eerie composure. The focus shifted to the letter in her hand. The final line stood out: "Darkness is an affliction, light is tranquility, a single disaster and its attributions." She held the message close to her chest, whispering that it had to be a promise only her master would understand. She seemed to grasp his intent. Evan, still on edge, cautiously reached for his sword, but she only smiled, darkly amused, her grin unsettling. Elsewhere, Alon lay comfortably in bed, exhaling with satisfaction. He quietly reflected that it had been a productive day. Another step toward preserving his comfortable lifestyle. Gazing at the night sky, he imagined the moon itself was silently cheering him on. With that comforting thought, he closed his eyes, ready to face tomorrow. The next scene placed Alon in the mansion library, flipping through books in search of answers. One dropped onto his head, earning a frustrated mutter. Finding information on the third boss was proving more difficult than expected. Evan entered just then, reporting that the second child had been successfully retrieved. Alon responded with mild interest and asked if they'd been treated well. Evan confirmed that after rescuing the child from an illegal slave market, they had handled the situation with care. At that moment, Tonio Palacio, the Count's second son, walked in. He spotted Alon and sneered. With mock surprise, he pointed out Alan's presence in a library, elbowing him in the head while mocking his illiteracy and recent attempts at learning to read. He demanded Alon respond, reminding him that he was speaking to his elder brother. Alon swallowed his fury. He wondered how the original Alon had ever endured this. Resisting the urge to retaliate, he bowed politely and said that if his brother wished to use the study, he would leave. Tonio pressed a foot onto his head, smugly remarking that at least he knew his place. Suddenly, a knife sliced through the air, slamming into the wall beside Tonio's face. The blade belonged to Leo Palacio, the eldest brother. Leo stood at the entrance, calm and cold, stating that the noise was becoming intolerable. Tonio turned to him, furious, but Leo warned him not to push further. He wasn't in the mood for bloodshed this early. He ordered both of them out. Tonio, refusing to back down, grabbed Leo by the collar and suggested that he should leave the stench of commoners outside. Leo raised a knife to Tonio's throat with icy calm and warned him to stop flooding the study with drugs and disappear. While the two brothers clashed, Alon slipped away. As he walked off, his thoughts turned over the situation. In the game, the Palladio brothers had been minor characters, but here their influence was enormous. He recalled their reputations: Leo, the king of debauchery and underworld crime; Tonio, the drug lord with a sprawling cartel. Evan escorted him from the scene while the siblings' fight continued behind them. Alan's mind grew focused. If he wanted a peaceful life, he'd need to avoid provoking either of them at all costs. His strategy was simple: stay weak, act useless, and keep his head down. Later, Alon collapsed onto a plush sofa with a sigh. Evan, standing nearby, mentioned that the second rescued child wasn't exactly ordinary. He glanced at Alon, silently wondering how someone who seemed so fragile could uncover secret labs and black market operations to save children. He couldn't find a reason. Alon murmured that it was all exhausting. Evan studied him closely and commented that his young master was truly odd. He noted that the rescued child was being sent to an orphanage too. Alon gave a silent nod. Internally, he reflected on what Evan had said. The child wasn't just unusual, she was a walking disaster. The one saved from the Callian Kingdom's illegal slave trade, the central state among several United Nations, was none other than Deus Macrian, better known as the second boss in Psyche Delia. Passed between masters, abused and broken, he would later become the sin of sloth, one of the 5 great sins. In the game, he had destroyed kingdoms in grotesque, unforgettable ways. Despite the name, the sin of sloth had been an unstoppable force who repaid cruelty with apocalyptic vengeance. Alon remembered warning players not to treat Evan poorly in Deus's route. That child had terrifying potential. Now sipping his tea, Alon calmly noted to himself that the reason he sent her away was simple: the timing still wasn't right. Evan asked whether the letter Alon had sent to Lady Utia had anything to do with the second rescued child. Alon replied vaguely, saying it was just a friendly note, nothing more than a message to let her know he was sending someone troubled and to ask that she look after them. Elsewhere, Deus stood alone when Utia approached. She examined him with clinical calm and remarked that he was clearly broken. The scars across his body, she identified as the work of the black goat. With an eerie calmness, she stated that the great moon had chosen him. She offered congratulations, urging him to embrace the power he'd been granted and release what belonged to him by right. If he pledged loyalty to the Lord, she said, revenge would be his. She extended a hand toward him in apparent friendship, but the dark, malignant energy radiating from her made him recoil. Afterward, Utia read Alan's letter. With a neutral tone, she commented that it was simply a greeting, but she supposed it warranted a response. Back at the estate, Alon sat buried in books, flipping through pages with mounting frustration. He muttered that the third boss remained elusive. Just then, Evan burst into the room, visibly shaken. He reported urgent news. Tonio, the second son of the Count, the same one who had mocked Alon before, was dead. Alon went still, stunned. His mind repeated the thought: that scoundrel was actually gone. The scene shifted to Tonio's funeral. The hall was filled with mourners, Alon and Evan among them. The mood was heavy, until the Count arrived. He stumbled in high on drugs, flanked by 2 provocatively dressed women draped over each arm. One woman complained she was tired and wanted to get back to bed. The other said she was hungry. Watching them cling to the Count while his son lay in a coffin nearby made Alan's stomach turn. He already knew the Count was corrupt, but this was grotesque even for a dark fantasy world. Alan's thoughts turned back to Tonio. Dying from an accidental fall this early felt wrong. In the game, Tonio had clawed his way to power after years of torment and eventually claimed the family title. He had sobbed about the hardship, proud of his rise to Count. Yet now, the current Count wore a twisted smirk, like he had gained something, not lost it. From that expression alone, Alon was certain the killer had to be Leo, or someone acting under him. Still, Alon reminded himself of the bigger picture. His mission was to dismantle the 5 great sins. Everything else was noise. A year passed. With Leo taking over the drug operation, the Palladio estate fell into a relative calm. During that time, Alan's letters with Utia continued steadily. Their bond had grown, and he knew it would be useful later. One quiet evening, Alon sat with Evan as they ate in silence. He read a new letter from Utia. She wrote that Gina was thriving, playful, well-loved, and growing up without trouble. Alon smiled to himself, thinking they sounded like good children. But a particular line caught his attention. The number of sponsors supporting the orphanage had increased again. He found it odd that such a small place kept attracting so many backers. Evan noticed the puzzled look and commented that while it was unusual, it could only help the children. Then he remembered something and said the Information Guild had found a lead. That snapped Alan's attention back. He asked if it was related to the search for the third boss. Evan confirmed, and Alon let out a breath of relief. Finally, there was progress. The chase might soon be over. The night felt serene, a calm that hinted at an approaching storm. Elsewhere, in a drug distribution outpost called Merrick, 2 members of the operation entered the compound. As they walked through the corridors, one commented on how generous the eldest Pallatio's son was, always handing out impressive rewards. The other noted that their ranks had already swelled to several hundred members and the future looked bright. But as they moved deeper inside, their words died. Bodies littered the ground, blood soaking into the floor. Shock hit them like a hammer. Then, without warning, their limbs began to twitch violently. Their hands moved against their will, guided by an invisible force. Before they could grasp what was happening, each man plunged a knife into his own throat, collapsing in a pool of blood. From afar, Deus and Utia had been controlling them like marionettes. Utia, watching the carnage unfold, remarked with quiet amusement that she had enjoyed today's performance. She noted that the list of new sponsors had grown again. Deus, still watching the massacre, admitted he felt no pity for the victims. They had turned humans into drug ingredients, but he couldn't understand how this act helped him get revenge. Utia calmly assured him that everything had purpose. These killings were laying the foundation for his return, preparing a place that would be worthy of him. She explained that his arrival couldn't be in a wasteland, his return deserved spectacle. Smirking, she seemed almost reverent. Deus acknowledged this explanation with quiet acceptance. Then, lifting her hand, Utia summoned a surge of energy. She and Deus rose slowly into the air, her voice echoing as she declared that everything was progressing as he had willed. They, the Blue Moon, she said, were his weapon. 2 years had passed since Alon began exchanging letters with Utia. Much had changed in that quiet time. Meanwhile, Evan wandered the estate, worn down from fatigue, searching for Alon. He finally spotted him in the backyard. Exhausted, he collapsed to the ground, gasping that he had found him. Alon turned, surprised, and acknowledged his arrival. Evan managed to inform him that the 5th child had been safely delivered to the orphanage. Alon paused, a flicker of reflection passing through him. He had now rescued the remaining 3 future sins. The weight of that achievement settled heavily on him. Wanting to lift the mood, he tossed Evan a few sweet cakes. Evan caught them eagerly, grinning through his exhaustion and munching like he hadn't eaten in days. Alon watched with a rare softness, thinking back to how much effort it had taken to find the 3rd sin, greed. Thanks to his knowledge of the game, and Evan doing most of the actual legwork, everything had fallen into place. Alon told Evan he had done well, and that now he could finally rest. Evan lay flat on the grass and asked if that meant the orphanage missions were officially over. Alon confirmed that they were. Evan let out a deep sigh of relief and closed his eyes. Then, after a moment, he asked why Alon didn't look happy about it. Alon responded that he was, but Evan didn't buy it. He said Alan's face still looked like he was at a dull social gathering. Alon, keeping his usual flat expression, claimed he was smiling. Evan rolled his eyes, clearly unimpressed, and muttered that if that was a smile, then Alon had probably never seen a real one. To him, Alon looked more like someone forced to attend a boring tea party than a man who'd just averted a disaster. Later, Alon was seen lying on the grass, staring up at the sky, deep in thought. Everything had gone smoother than expected. In the game, the bosses of Psyche-Delia had all become the 5 great sins because of the tragedies in their past. Even though this world was set before those events, saving them before they broke had seemed almost impossible. He'd worried he'd be too late, only able to pick up the pieces afterward. But somehow, things had turned out differently. Maybe it was luck, or maybe the world was giving him a second chance. Breaking the silence, Alon asked Evan how the orphanage was doing. Evan, holding a letter, said it was the same, quiet, stable. The children, once lifeless and traumatized, had begun to smile and live again. Alon listened, then remarked that it sounded like they didn't even need a caretaker anymore. He was genuinely surprised. He hadn't expected Utia to manage things so well. Originally, he assumed she'd hate the role, but perhaps, because of how her story had been tied to the orphanage in the game, something had clicked into place. Either way, it was working, and that was all that mattered. From a fresh perspective, Alon began to see Utia differently. She wasn't just capable, but genuinely good at heart. Evan, curious, asked if her letter contained anything noteworthy. As Alon opened it, the contents reassured him. The children were doing well, growing up healthy and stable. Deus, once volatile, had settled. There was no need to worry. Alon felt a warmth he hadn't expected, something like pride. The 5 sins, once destined for ruin, were now living peaceful, normal lives. He began to realize how much environment could shape a person. Even broken souls, given the right support, could heal. Evan then asked when Alon planned to meet the children. He reminded him that he always said he would when the time was right. Alon responded vaguely, trailing off mid-sentence. Internally, He admitted he never truly intended to face them. Their pasts, even before becoming sins, had always been disturbing, even in childhood. He had saved them early, but the thought of confronting them directly still unnerved him. After a pause, he murmured that maybe in 5 years it would feel safe. Evan accepted that without question. For now, Alon knew his focus had to shift. He needed skills, self-defense, and the ability to survive in this dark fantasy world. Fortunately, the body he now inhabited had natural magic potential. He began training immediately, releasing small bursts of mana from his hands. Light shimmered faintly across his face as he practiced. Evan, watching, mentioned something odd. A group called Blue Moon. Alon had never heard of it. Evan explained it was a rising organization, famous for eliminating criminal syndicates with surgical precision. They even targeted corrupt nobles. That caught Alan's attention. He didn't remember any such group in the game and assumed it must have been some minor event he'd skipped. But hearing they killed nobles too made him uneasy. He decided, from that night on, he'd start sleeping in the underground guild for safety. The scene shifted. At a dimly lit table, the current members of Blue Moon gathered. The Sin of Pride, Saoling, feline and composed, requested the weekly activity report. Yusha responded first, reporting on the Northern Purge. Saoling, licking her hand absent-mindedly, said the job had gone flawlessly. Slavers were dead, and no one suspected a thing. She praised Rein's outfit design, noting how even victims begged to see her eye color, yet no one ever learned who she was. Rein, the Sin of Greed, added that the corpses had been thoroughly dissolved, leaving no trace. Raiden, Sin of Envy, reported the South was handled as well. The illegal lab and Avalon's remaining men had been crushed completely. Yusha smiled darkly, affirming everything was progressing according to his will. They moved in the name of the Great Moon, the deity they secretly worshipped. Delos, the Sin of Lust, interrupted with bad news. If everything followed his will, there shouldn't be flaws, yet one had appeared. He revealed that Avalon's leader was actually the Count's eldest son. During the South's purge, they'd uncovered a chilling plan. The eldest son was plotting to poison him to death. Yusha's expression turned icy. A thick, bloody aura filled the room, chilling even the other sins. In her hand was a letter with instructions. After the old man dies, make sure the body is poisoned, quietly. Her voice grew dangerously quiet as she confirmed the plot was real. 2 years passed. The Count of Palladio died. The official report claimed a heart attack, but with his drug abuse, it was clear what had really happened. At his funeral, only silence greeted his passing. Alon stood there, watching. Whispers among the nobles mentioned another Blue Moon massacre, 50 dead. Even the aristocracy was beginning to take them seriously now. With no mourners and no ceremony, the Count's funeral ended. Afterward, Alon and Evan walked away together. From a distance, Leo watched, his gaze unreadable. Evan asked what Alon planned next. He reminded him that the eldest son would officially inherit the title next year. Then, noticing all the packed luggage, he asked what was happening. Alon calmly said it was time to go. He told Evan to pack up, they were leaving. Evan was stunned, asking if they were abandoning the territory. Alon clarified, they weren't leaving permanently, just heading south. Evan asked if he meant Road Mill. Alon confirmed. That small village in Palladio's southern edge was their next stop. They left soon after, the carriage rolling out under the gray skies. Leo stood back, fists clenched, unable to stop them. In Road Mill, the days were quiet. Alon cooked egg toast and shared meals with Evan, enjoying the peace, but it didn't last. After 3 days, they returned to the main estate. News awaited them, Leo was dead. At the funeral, Alon stood silently, unable to believe how surreal it all felt. This place again. Another death. But this time, Leo hadn't overdosed or vanished. He'd been stabbed straight through the heart. Alon silently wondered who could have done it. Then a servant approached, trying to explain the cause. But as their eyes met, the servant froze, panic flashing across his face. He stammered an apology just for making eye contact, his body trembling with fear. Alon furrowed his brow, confused by the servant's sudden panic. He turned to Evan and quietly asked if anything unusual had come up. Leaning in, Evan hesitantly suggested the unthinkable. Could Alon have been the one who eliminated Leo? The question hit like a thunderclap. Alon froze, stunned. His eyes swept over the nearby servants and maids, and the moment their eyes met his, fear rippled through them. The room seemed to hold its breath, chilled by the oppressive aura that now clung to him. The story cut back to earlier, on the day they left for Rodmal. In the carriage, Evan had casually suggested that if they were leaving anyway, a bigger city might be more worthwhile. But Alon had already decided. Rodmal was key to his plan. With the 5 great sins saved and the future catastrophe avoided, he needed a place completely disconnected from the main story. Rodmal was remote, peaceful, and it had the Palatial Villa. It was perfect for a life of lazy nobility. When Evan pressed for a reason, Alon brushed it off, saying there was one. Evan, unconvinced, said he wasn't falling for vague answers anymore. Alon simply told him to let it go, and the carriage rolled away from the capital. Back at the estate, Leo considered killing Alon but quickly dismissed the idea. Whether Alon lived or died didn't matter anymore. After their father's death, Leo had even toyed with poisoning him, but with Alon heading to the frontier willingly, it wasn't worth the trouble. Still, Leo had suspicions, particularly about Alon Haven. Muttering that Alon was becoming annoying, he ordered his subordinate, Alman, to follow the carriage. When Alman asked if that meant killing Alon, Leo was taken aback. Alman wasn't known for questioning orders. Leo reminded him sharply that his job was to obey. But without warning, Alman drove a sword into Leo's chest. Leo, in shock and fury, demanded an explanation. Alman, voice trembling but eerily calm, explained that he had enjoyed the game so far. He revealed that Blue Moon agents followed the creed of the Red Moon and acted on its will. Anyone threatening the Great Moon was fair game, even Leo. He drove the blade deeper, and Leo collapsed, bleeding heavily. Speaking as if addressing others, Alman declared that Leo would not escape justice. With that final blow, he said Avalon would vanish from the continent. What a pity, considering the Great Moon had offered Leo a chance. Then, without hesitation, Alman fled. The next morning, Alon greeted the day with a stretch and a smile. Rodmal was a dream, quiet, comfortable, and indulgent. He woke when he wanted, ate what he liked. For a moment, he even considered starting a toast business. But the mood shattered when Evan brought a message. Alon asked what it was, and Evan read it aloud. The news was devastating. Alon dropped his food, stunned. In disbelief, he realized his short-lived paradise had lasted just 3 days. The next scene showed Alon and Evan returning to the capital for Leo's funeral. As he stepped back into the mansion, Alon thought grimly about being pulled back into the chaos of the Palladio family. The dramatics from soldiers and servants made him uneasy. Evan turned and asked if he was officially returning to the family now. The question startled Alon. In his head, he cursed the ridiculous loop he seemed trapped in, an endless string of wild scenarios. Sitting with Evan in a quiet corner, Alon asked, desperate for clarity, why everyone now saw him as the mastermind behind it all. Evan nervously explained. Alon had the perfect alibi. Leo was murdered right after they left for Rodmal, and now Alon stood as heir. The implication hit hard. Evan, with a mix of awe and unease, said that Alon had become the new master of the family, the one pulling strings from the shadows. And worse, people now believed he commanded swordmasters to carry out assassinations. Alon stared blankly, realizing he had somehow inherited the legacy of a noble mastermind, with no idea how it had happened. Alon watched Evan's delight and asked if he truly found the situation amusing. Beneath the calm, Alan's mind raced. He struggled to comprehend how any group could erase an underworld titan like Avalon overnight. It didn't make sense. He recalled hearing about an organization that hunted at dawn and asked Evan if he meant Blue Moon. Evan replied that the Information Guild believed it wasn't them. He explained that Blue Moon never left corpses, only their mark. But this time, bodies were left behind, as if sliced apart by swords. The scene was described as a vision of hell. Alon, half in disbelief, accepted that people now believed he was a mastermind commanding a swordmaster. Still, he couldn't shake the confusion. Blue Moon hadn't appeared in the game, and this level of power didn't match a group that should have been irrelevant before the main story even started. So who had done this? Meanwhile, Yusha, the Bloody Queen, questioned her team about any evidence left behind. Rein, sin of greed, confirmed there were none. Saoling, sin of pride, laughed and added that the only thing left was piles of corpses. Deus Macrian entered next, reporting that 486 Avalon operatives remained. Raiden, sin of purity, stood behind him and stated they'd already been cut down. The purge was absolute. Yusha praised their thoroughness, calling their work flawless. She smiled, proud that Avalon, once a powerhouse in Asteria, had been reduced to rubble in just 5 days. But Raiden warned the cleanup wasn't complete. When Yusha asked what he meant, he handed her a file containing a list of nobles still connected to Avalon. The Altea Duchy was particularly entangled. Yusha glanced through the file, then looked at her subordinates, asking if they already knew what she was about to say. The team responded with fierce loyalty. Raiden volunteered to handle the matter discreetly. Yusha turned to Rein for updates from the Information Guild. Rein, thumbing through a book, tore out a page and said the guild had labeled the incident unrelated to Blue Moon. As he tore out more pages, Deus used magic to float them into the air. Speaking to the others, Deus declared that since his blood was first spilled, this act wasn't an order, it was instinct. They were the sword. Yusha's composure cracked. Her voice turned firm as she reminded them that a sword does not act on its own. Blue Moon existed to follow orders, not instincts. She stressed that everything they did must align with his will. He knew all, and failure was not an option. Deus, quietly processing her fear, couldn't understand how someone as powerful as Yusha could feel such pressure, until he accepted that it was all for the Great Moon, for him. Back at the Palacio estate, Alon, now the sole heir, found himself buried under the mountain of responsibilities left behind by his father and brothers. He was mentally drained, frustrated, and overwhelmed. After the funeral, he'd spent an entire month drowning in administrative work. He had longed to live as a carefree noble, but the deaths had drastically altered the game's timeline. Leo's death alone, which should have happened 6 years later, had shifted everything. Now, 5 more workers arrived with additional paperwork. Alon stared in disbelief. They used to slack off under the old count, yet now they were acting like loyal civil servants. His annoyed gaze made them even more anxious, pushing them to work harder, afraid of disappointing the man whispered to be the dark mastermind. Alon sighed internally, if only they'd manage themselves. Later, with the work done, Evan sat nearby. He once again voiced admiration for Alan's magical progress. Reaching the second circle in just 2 years of self-study was nothing short of exceptional. Evan said most people needed 4 years of tutoring to even get close. As Alon practiced, small bursts of magic lit the room. Evan added that magic required rare innate talent. Without it, people couldn't even begin to control mana. Alon, now labeled a prodigy, continued training, though all he'd wanted was an easy, quiet life. Alon responded half-heartedly that he was doing all right, though inwardly he reflected that he'd been training harder than ever, not for glory, but survival. Magic, while thrilling at first, had become a necessity. Still, his progress frustrated him. The technique he was learning demanded precise mana control, but his efforts felt wasted. His mana hole, the innate vessel for energy, was far too small. Like a sprinter with bad knees, he simply lacked the natural specs. The realization hit hard. He mentally cursed his luck, lamenting how nothing ever seemed to go smoothly, but he reminded himself there was still one possible solution, should things truly fall apart. Before he could dwell on that, Evan interrupted with news. The invitation to the upcoming ball had finally arrived. Alon blinked, caught off guard by the sudden shift in priorities. Soon after, the two arrived at the Southern Asterian ball. Alon already looked drained, but as a future count, attendance was non-negotiable. He figured this might be the right time to establish ties with other nobles, important groundwork for his long-term peace. While Alon brooded in silence, Evan noticed his serious expression and asked what was on his mind. Alon continued thinking that alliances were crucial, but before he could act, the room began to shift. One by one, nobles noticed his presence, and reacted with visible fear. They whispered, avoided eye contact, and quickly created distance. Alon attempted a polite greeting, but the noble in question recoiled and fled. Evan, trying to console him like a sulking child, said not to take it personally. Alon wasn't surprised, it was disappointing, but expected. Determined not to give up, he left Evan's side to try again. He assumed they must be dismissing him as some uncultured fringe noble. After all, the Palacio family's name had long since degraded. Once a symbol of greatness under his great-grandfather, they were now whispered about as Eastern trash. Grabbing a wine glass, Alon reminded himself he had come prepared. His secret weapon. Charm. With a carefully practiced smile, unfortunately more unnerving than charming, he approached a young lady, commenting on the wine's aroma and casually saying he might bring some bottles home. The lady, clearly uncomfortable, froze. Her face paled. She nodded hastily, said she'd ask her father to send some, and bolted. Alon, confused, tried to explain, but she was already gone. Moments later, she was seen complaining to her father, adding fuel to Alan's already troubled image. Watching from afar, Alon sighed. Nothing had gone to plan. Evan soon rejoined him, once again offering awkward comfort. Alon tried rationalizing the disaster. Maybe the girl was just shy. Later, in a quieter dining area, Evan casually listed off Alan's spoils from the evening: a Paldine thoroughbred, premium tangerine tea, refined Belanda metal, and a rare bottle of Malentino wine. Despite the haul, Alon stood nearby, visibly deflated. Evan reminded him that he had studied wines seriously for this event, but Alan's thoughts remained grim. He now fully realized how tainted the Palacio name had become. After rumors spread that he had personally eliminated his two violent brothers, the nobility had begun avoiding him entirely. Networking had failed, spectacularly. If anything, their distance had only grown. Feeling the pressure close in, Alon told Evan he needed some air and stepped outside alone. As he exited the hall, a quiet figure with striking red hair watched him disappear into the night. Out on the balcony, Alon stared at the night sky, lost in thought, wondering how everything had veered so far off course. Just as he sank deeper into his own doubts, a voice called out, politely asking for a moment of his time. Startled, since no noble had dared speak to him all evening, he turned, but saw no one nearby. Then he looked down and spotted a girl below, introducing herself as Loria, the third daughter of Duke Altea. The name hit him like a jolt. Altea was one of the three major shadow powers in psychedelia, infamously known as the Northern Degenerates. Of course, the first person to approach him had to be someone with a shady background. Still, he didn't recall her from the game, which only deepened his unease. Loria, clearly distressed, asked for his help. Her voice trembled as she explained that her father was gravely ill, and her sisters were plotting to kill her to eliminate any competition. Alan's mind went cold. That explained why she hadn't appeared in the game. She was already dead by the time the story began. With a pained expression, she begged for his protection, convinced he held the power to save her. But Alon refused without hesitation. She pressed further, offering half of House Altea in exchange for his aid, but he still declined, ending the conversation with a polite farewell. As he walked away, he acknowledged that her situation was tragic, but he could barely manage his own survival. Getting involved meant inviting more chaos, and despite the rumors, he didn't actually wield any special power. He turned back briefly, telling her something good might happen, and quietly hoped she'd find someone else to help her. Elsewhere, hidden in an upper corner of the hall, Dios and Rhine observed the exchange. Dios commented that Altea had reached out to the Great Moon. He considered informing the Red Moon that something promising might unfold for Loria, but Rhine dismissed the idea. According to their intelligence, Loria was the only Altea not linked to Avalon, so she wasn't a priority. Dios found that comforting. The rest of House Altea would be dealt with regardless. Rhine affirmed their orders, to sever all information flow and keep the Avalon purge from ever reaching him. Back in the corridor, Alon walked alone, feeling a strange stillness in the air, as if the entire space had been sealed off. Then, out of the quiet, a strikingly beautiful woman approached, offering a graceful greeting and a practiced smile. For a second, Alon felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, someone in this hall would finally treat him like a normal noble. He greeted her back, but something felt off. Recognition hit him a moment later. It was her. Kalia Xenonia. Of course. The first person who smiled at him had to be another walking disaster. Addressing her respectfully, he called her Lady Xenonia. She smiled playfully, amused that he already knew her. Alon replied that her reputation preceded her. Inwardly, he recounted the hierarchy of villainy in the kingdom of Asteria, Altea in the north, Palatio in the east, and Xenonia in the west. If Palatio were a brutish gang, Xenonia ran its empire like a polished, high-class criminal enterprise. Alon reminded himself he needed political connections, not entanglements. For the sake of his peaceful, low-risk life, people like her were dangerous. He gave her a compliment, calling her beautiful, using that as an excuse for his attention before trying to exit gracefully. But her smirk deepened. Thanking him, she invited him to stay and talk longer, her tone silky, her gaze sharp. And just like that, the peaceful evening he'd hoped for slipped even further from reach. Alon responded politely, saying he would enjoy talking more, but noted too many eyes were watching them. Inside, though, he just wanted to disappear quietly. Kalia smiled once more, commented that he matched the rumors, and said she looked forward to seeing him again before gracefully walking away. Left behind, Alon stood there puzzled, trying to make sense of the strange encounter. Elsewhere, Ryan reported to Deus that the Avalon information leak had been fully contained. Deus, however, mentioned a new concern. Someone had been watching Alon. A tale like that couldn't be ignored. Sure enough, hidden in the trees nearby, an observer was tracking Alon from the shadows. Ryan explained there were no specific orders yet regarding this figure, but if necessary, they would act. With that, Ryan and Deus swiftly left the area. The next morning, Alon and Evan journeyed toward a vast canyon. Evan asked if his lord was sure. This place seemed to match everything they'd been looking for. Though it was broad daylight, the interior of the canyon was unnaturally dark. Alon felt a flicker of excitement. This was it, his real destination. The environmental details matched perfectly. He muttered that if this one turned out to be another dead end, he'd be crushed, but deep down, he was confident. This wasn't a guess anymore. In the game, this location had been simple to find. But now, in reality, he had traveled under the guise of another errand just to reach it. The Labyrinth of Whispers, a southern ruin filled with 8 puzzle chambers and a hidden relic as its prize. Alon still remembered the entire walkthrough, and the thought of finally starting from scratch, level 1 grinding in real life, filled him with strange joy. As they reached the canyon's carved entrance, Alon was struck by awe. Seeing the labyrinth in person after years of gaming felt surreal. Even though he'd grown tired of this dungeon in-game, being here now brought back that long-lost wonder. The surrounding terrain looked almost impossibly man-made, as if someone had carved it out with divine precision. Evan, baffled, asked how Alon knew about places like this. Alon casually replied that he used to come here often. When Evan echoed that in disbelief, Alon chuckled, saying he was joking. He had his ways, and they needed to keep moving. Evan, still unsettled, asked him not to joke like that with such a serious face. They continued on, eventually spotting massive bats circling overhead. These weren't ordinary creatures, their wings cut through the air like blades. Evan tensed up, imagining how one wrong riddle answer might get them flattened. But Alon stayed completely calm, silent and focused, seemingly unfazed by the looming threat. Evan glanced at him, puzzled. Even after 4 years together, he still couldn't understand his master. Nothing they did ever connected. Paying off debts, helping slaves, dismantling dark organizations, delivering nonsense letters, even saving orphans. Yet despite never leaving home much, Alon somehow knew everything, even about a place like this. And that, to Evan, was the most unsettling mystery of all. Alon calmly remarked that he had answered the riddle correctly, though the door wouldn't open until the task was fully complete. Evan, watching silently, thought to himself that following his strange young master always seemed to lead to something worthwhile. Then, with a deep rumble, the massive stone door slowly creaked open. Alon grimaced, feeling nauseous at the sound and movement, barely managing to keep his eyes off the unsettling sight beyond. He already knew this dungeon was brutal, but seeing it in person still turned his stomach. Evan exhaled with relief. The chamber was finally open. Before them stretched a mountain of treasure. Gold, silver, gemstones piled high. But Alan's eyes locked only on a single black ring. He told Evan to ignore the rest and take just the ring. Evan picked up a gold bar, puzzled by Alan's complete disregard for the fortune around them. Still, he obeyed as Alan slipped the black ring on his finger. It was slightly loose, but Alan didn't care. He told Evan that anything else would just invite problems. Inside, Alan was elated. He had acquired the constraint, the artifact he'd come all this way to find. Confident there were no more traps, he reassured Evan that their return would be smooth. Evan nodded, though his nerves remained. Alan thought to himself how easy this had been thanks to his memory of the game's walkthrough. But just as he began to relax, Evan's panicked voice broke the silence. He asked if Alan had foreseen this, because the stone piles around them were moving. Golems. Hundreds of them stirred to life, glowing eyes locked on their position. Evan's instincts screamed danger, but his focus remained on getting Alan out alive. Before he could act, Alan stepped forward, stating firmly that this time he would fight. Evan tried to stop him, but Alan insisted that their priority was escape, and second-tier magic wouldn't be enough for this kind of enemy. As the golems charged, Alan activated the black ring. The artifact flared to life, and in an instant, Alan vanished. He found himself in a void, floating, weightless, as a deep voice echoed around him. The voice called him a fragment of Nimrlala's will and asked him to speak the two constraints he would enact. Alan immediately recognized the situation. In the game, this had been a menu selection. But now, it was real, no interface, no keyboard. Just the voice and him. This artifact, the constraint, would amplify power at a cost. Restrictions imposed would become permanent conditions for casting. Alan didn't hesitate. First, he declared that all spellcasting would require the hand seals of Babaloya. The voice asked what power he sought by setting this rule. Alan responded that he wanted to bend the world's laws a little further. The voice accepted. Next, Alan added a second constraint. Every spell must be cast using the sacred words of Babaloya. When asked again what he wished to gain, he simply repeated that his purpose remained unchanged. For a moment, the void went silent. Alan felt a flash of doubt. Had he done something wrong? This combination gave the highest magic attack bonus in the game. He had memorized the entire set of hand signs and incantations. This had to work. Finally, the voice responded. It accepted his offering and addressed him as a mortal who remembered the lost seals of a forgotten god. It spoke with reverence, thanking him for carrying on Nimrlala's will. Alan, confused, wondered what exactly it meant by inheritor, but there was no time to ask. The ring's light surged, seeping into his body. It had worked. One final phrase echoed as the light faded. It had always been watching him. Then, Alan reappeared back in the canyon. Golems still advancing. Evan called out in a panic, reminding him that ordinary spells wouldn't work. Alan began casting. A small lightning sphere flickered between his hands. He poured in all his mana, but the result remained faint. His natural limits hadn't changed. Time to test the price. Alan formed the proper hand seals, muttered the sacred words, and released the spell. The air around him crackled as a brilliant surge of energy formed between his hands. The black ring glowed, its magic flaring like a beacon. As the spell intensified, the ring transformed, no longer just an artifact, but now a true vessel for his magic. Alan could still feel its weight, heavy around his finger, but its power had awakened. Thrusting the orb toward the golem, Alan felt the cave tremble around him. Amid the rising chaos, his voice carried through the stone corridors as he announced that it was time to test the limits of restriction and accept whatever price came with it. He raised his voice again as he invoked refraction. Blue energy wrapped around his hands, and he stared ahead with unwavering focus. His tone sharpened as he added that it was time for rebound. A wave of thunder burst outward, shaking the massive golem's throne. He followed with another command, declaring that blue lightning would answer him. A surge of blue and purple thunder fused with his strongest magical cannon, forming a glowing circle that pulsed with destructive power. Lightning tore across the cavern, shaking the walls. Dozens of golems rushed him, but Alan didn't flinch. He whispered that he would linger just for this fraction of a moment, shaping 3 intricate hand signs in the air. Thunder sparked at his fingertips and erupted into a storm that reduced every golem to ash. The shelter collapsed under the force of the spell. Evan, his loyal knight, could only stare in awe. He murmured that he could not understand how the young master had done something like this. The thunder's afterglow lingered across the ruins, drifting stone dust, faint purple light, and the crackle of dying magic. Silence settled over the cave, broken only by the hum of fading lightning. Evan stepped forward, trembling as he remarked that it was unbelievable, and asked why his young master had gone quiet. Alan's gaze stayed cold and distant. Without answering, he walked deeper into the cave. Evan muttered under his breath, wondering where such power had been hidden all this time. In 15 years of service, he had never witnessed anything like it. He asked if that had truly been second-tier magic. Alan didn't respond at first. His eyes flickered as old memories overlapped inside his mind. He eventually murmured that he was unsure himself. It had never been this strong in the game. He remembered Psychedelia's turn-based combat system, how each spell could be enhanced with a signal or an enunciation every turn. Chain lightning, once a simple attack, had turned into something alive here. If all 5 turns of enchantments had stacked onto the Thunderblades and fused into a massive lightning storm, then even he had underestimated the result. His thoughts drifted back to his awakening, when he had offered gratitude to a universal being, the forgotten god who kept the secret of ancient magic. He reflected that in exchange for the restriction forcing him to chant a signal for every spell, he had gained something else, a fragment from a mortal who had once touched divinity. Returning to the moment, he breathed out slowly and muttered that even second-tier magic felt like overkill. The result had exceeded even his own expectations. Behind him, Evan exhaled in relief and announced that they were finally out of that cursed cave. They stepped into the open while lightning still flickered across the mountains and forest. Exhausted, Evan sank onto a rock to catch his breath, admitting that this was harsher than any battle he had faced. After a long pause, he muttered that whoever designed such a place must have been out of their mind. Alan gave a quiet exhale. His thoughts drifted again. He recalled that the Whispering Labyrinth had another name. It was well known in the community through maps and old guidebooks. Players had called it the Pavilion Labyrinth, a nickname that had spread naturally. Alan's gaze hardened as old notifications from his past life flickered in his mind. He finally said that it had been created by someone named Pelion. Evan blinked in confusion and asked what he had meant, but his condition was deteriorating. His steps faltered and his body trembled as if every ounce of strength had drained away. He stumbled and nearly collapsed onto Alan for support. Alan frowned and stated firmly that they were heading back east, that 3 weeks of work were waiting, and that he had something he needed to accomplish when they returned. Evan mustered a weak laugh, saying the young master was more diligent than expected. Inside, the knight sank into quiet despair, wondering what would become of him and why he could not even protect his own honor. He thought bitterly that he was becoming a useless knight, but Alan remained steady. He explained gently that choosing a sigil aligned with a spell's element increased its potential, and picking the proper incantation strengthened its properties. That was how the system worked. He recalled how, in the game, the visuals remained static and only the attack pattern shifted. Here, every spell visibly transformed before his eyes. He thought that every incantation carried a real change now. His mana control might be far stronger than before. Once he recovered his mana, he would have to test it. Alan lifted his gaze to the quiet sky. He spoke softly that everything had turned out well in the end. Moonlight washed over the mountains, painting the forest in silver. A shadow moved. A slender figure stepped into the pale glow. Reyna stood with cold, sharp eyes reflecting the moonlight. She moved quickly from rock to rock, silent and precise, until she entered the same cave Alan had left. Her gaze fell on a stone tablet carved with ancient markings. She whispered that it spoke of the age of the forgotten outer gods. She recognized the script of the Eliantha Empire. Tilting her head, she continued reading, noting that the inscription honored a friend left alone, and that the swordmaster Pelon had stood his ground. Her expression darkened as she traced an old mark on the stone. Standing before the glowing tablets, she began explaining that the Pelon mentioned had repelled the invasion of the Black Ones. He had defeated Akaloka, who devoured his own subject hard, and also the Radiant Empire's great guardian, Pelon. She lifted her energy and murmured an ancient chant that echoed through the cave. She said she knew all of this because she had been born under the Great Mission and raised inside the ancient library. She muttered that she had suspected the Bloody Queen differed from the history books, that something about her had seemed extraordinary. The Yusha she read about is demonic, aura flaring with violent force. Her presence makes the air tremble. She murmured that to think that the Great Moon itself had once called Pelon a friend worthy of reverence. Moreover, that incantation Alan used did not exist in the ancient library. Her expression tightened as she wondered just who was Alan. She whispered to herself that the moon's words had been true. Walking out, Renee let a faint smirk soften into a rare smile. She murmured that she feels ashamed for merely following orders all this time. She notices someone approaching and remarks that he had finally arrived, and she asks if he managed to obtain the information. Dennis stepped forward. His calm yet violent eyes met hers as he reported that the man in black had already perished. His neck had suddenly twisted in midair, probably a spell to prevent leakage of information. Renee observed with a grave expression and muttered that he would have to file a report for proper handling later. The scene shifted under the beautiful yet eerie moonlight. Inside the Count Zenonia estate, the woman from the previous chapter sat on her couch, lost in thought. She whispered that she thought that it was only a rumor, but her mind returned to one lingering image, Alan's cold gaze, sharp and empty like the abyss. She clenched her hands and murmured that despite everything, she was famous. Count Zenonia held both influence and renown. Her expression hardened. She said it was strange that someone like her, who avoided social gatherings, was the one considered remarkable. She addressed her father, but her tone slipped into something darker as she confessed that no one would ever suspect she was the one destroying the house while her father had played the fool. A literal puppet led by her strings, a twisted smile formed as dark energy rippled around her. She whispered to herself, wondering how they had discovered her spy she sent after Alan, deciding that too many eyes must be watching. At that moment, a knight burst through the door, his armor clattering as he shouted her name, calling for Lady Kalea. She looked up sharply as the knight told her to return to her room at once. Breathless, he urged her to hurry. Moments later, Kalea stood frozen before a horrifying sight. A man lay collapsed on her floor, barely breathing. Her bodyguard knelt beside him and muttered that the seal had failed to activate, which meant the man had never spoken the secret. Kalea's crimson eyes darkened. She said that he had intentionally placed the object in her chamber. Her grip tightened and her smile twisted into something cruel as she whispered that he had discovered her vulnerability, catching her off guard with a major weakness exposed from the very moment they met. Elsewhere, Evan and Alan slept heavily, snoring without shame, completely unaware of the turmoil rising outside. Meanwhile, Loria rode in her carriage toward the Iltea ducal estate, her face weighted with disappointment and exhaustion. Her thoughts drifted through regret and dawning clarity. She had expected this outcome. She knew he was not a man to underestimate, the distinguished figure of the underworld whose cold gaze reminded her of her father. He was the type of person she should never turn into an enemy. He was her final lifeline, yet she understood he would never accept any deal that spelled true loss for him. All her influence and wealth had already been stripped away by her cunning siblings, the eldest son Tamalian, the eldest daughter Marianne, the second son Keeg, and the second daughter Pyron. With nothing left, she had survived only through her father's affection and mercy, even that now felt fragile. As she walked deeper into the estate, trapped in despair, she whispered to herself that she no longer knew what path remained. The moment she stepped into the main hall, the maids rushed toward her in panic, their voices shaking. They called for Lady Loria, their expressions pale with fear. They told her that Lady Pyron and Keeg had taken their own lives. Shock washed over Loria. Her body went rigid as disbelief rooted her to the floor. Those who had once betrayed their own blood choosing death. It made no sense. Fear tightened around her as she asked what had happened to Tamalian and Marianne. Soon after, she was brought to a dreadful sight. Both Tamalian and Marianne lay dead, each with a sword driven into the other's chest. Loria trembled, terror clawing its way through her as confusion screamed in her mind. Why and how had such horror unfolded? Outside the Iltea ducal estate, Raiden departed swiftly, a faint smirk curling at his lips as he muttered to himself that the task was successfully finished. Loria's thoughts snapped back to Alan's earlier words, the ones hinting that good things would soon arrive. A chill slid through her veins. She understood in an instant. The real mastermind within the Count's household, the one who had hidden his claws until the perfect moment, had finally acted. Now she was the only heir of the Iltea ducal family overnight. She wondered what kind of devil she had tied herself to, but she also knew there was no turning back. Those who crossed him had already met their end. There were too many examples to ignore. She told herself she had to walk the chosen road, no matter how dark it grew. A spark of resolve lit her eyes. 2 months later, a grand gift arrived from Duke Iltea, addressed to Alan. When Evan saw it, his eyes widened with surprise. Inside was a bottle of Sarnance wine, a rare luxury worth thousands of gold. He said that he never thought he would ever see such a treasure. When Alan opened the letter that accompanied it, he discovered the gift had not been sent by Duke Iltea himself but had been personally prepared by Loria, the youngest daughter. Confused, he asked the servant if the gift was truly intended for him. The servant confirmed that the Duke herself had prepared it and ordered its delivery. That phrase, the Duke herself, made Alan pause. Realization hit him. The youngest, Loria, had become the Duke. In her office, Loria sat sorting through documents. When she finally finished, she leaned back and stretched, quietly noting that 2 months had already passed. After her father's funeral, she had officially become the Duke. She remembered how, before her siblings' sudden deaths, she could not even approach that office. Her siblings had died so abruptly, yet no one suspected her. She had a perfect alibi. She had been attending a ball. At the time, her secret organization had been shattered by her siblings, leaving her powerless. But upon returning, she finally understood how meticulous his plans had been. He had rejected her plea with indifferent calm, while secretly wiping everything clean behind the scenes. She wondered how far ahead he had been thinking. She had not even told him about her father's death, wanting to avoid troubling him, yet he still acted on her behalf. He must have had a reason. He needed the Ultia name for something greater. Even after uniting all subordinate groups under the Ultia family, she knew it was still not enough to match the immense force he wielded behind that steady exterior. That could only mean one thing. He wanted something from her. He was the distinguished one of the underworld who rose through sheer business might, and if there was anything she possessed that he did not, it was her ability to influence the political stage from the shadows. He needed the Ultia lineage. She told herself to focus on her duties, believing he would reach out soon. She hoped he would appreciate her gift. The scene shifted to Alan's quarters. Loria's servant bowed, saying he would take his leave. Alan remained still, struggling to process the news. The idea that Loria, once so close to death, now stood as Duke felt unsettling. Evan noticed his unease but chose not to comment. Months passed. 5 years before the original story began, Evan entered with enthusiasm, calling out young master before correcting himself to count. Alan responded calmly that the succession ceremony had not been held yet, but since a year had passed, it was fine to address him that way. Despite his composure, he let out a quiet sigh. He had never intended to become count, but now that he had adjusted, he decided to make use of the title. Evan handed him a letter, saying it had arrived from Yusha. Alan accepted it and asked if there was any new information about the assassins who had killed Leo. As they walked into the library and took their seats, Evan replied that nothing had surfaced yet. The Information Guild was still searching. He then looked at Alan with curiosity and asked what his next goal would be now that revenge no longer seemed to drive him. Silence settled between them in the vast grand library. Alan thought carefully. Everything that had shifted from the original game had likely been butterfly effects born from his own actions. Accepting that, he decided he simply needed to be prepared for whatever unexpected turn awaited him. Evan laughed gently, saying he suddenly sounded like a real count. Alan brushed it off, then turned his attention to the letter, wondering what Yusha had written this time. Opening it, he began to read. Yusha wrote warmly, asking if he had been well. She said everyone was doing fine. Deus puppet shows were now at a professional level. Solrang enjoyed playing with friends, Rinne spent her days reading and crafting, and Raiden had taken an interest in tending his garden. A soft smile appeared on Alan's face. Their monthly letters had become something familiar and dear to him. Although he had never seen their faces, knowing they were growing well brought him peace. Alan asked Evan how old the children were now. Evan noticed his expression and said that they were mature enough to step into society. He reminded him that the ones Alan had ordered to be rescued were around that age now. Alan quietly acknowledged that it was time to let them go. Evan looked surprised and reminded him that he had placed them together because they were hurting. But Alan said calmly that there was no need anymore, they were ready. He thought to himself that he had cared for them enough to prevent any of them from awakening his deadly sins, so they should be safe, right? Evan nodded, agreeing that since they were healthy, it was time to move forward. Alan's thoughts drifted to his memories of the original game. Each of the 5 possessed a unique ability. Yusha carried the talent of faith, Day had the talent of the sword, Rinne held the talent of study, Solrang wielded the talent of a fighter, and Raiden bore the rare talent for leadership. If they used their gifts well, they would be more than fine. Feeling content, he decided to prepare a personal gift for each of them, something he had planned to do anyway. Evening settled in, and Alan announced cheerfully that he had finished all his tasks, startling Evan awake. Evan stretched with relief and said he would step outside for a short while before returning. Alan waved him off and wished him well. Smiling to himself, he wondered if one day he might receive something in return from them once they found their place in the world. He hoped that his letters would give them the confidence they needed to step forward. Meanwhile, in another scene, Yusha received Alan's newest letter. Gathering everyone together, she announced that their instructions had arrived. This time, however, each message was addressed individually. The room grew silent as they each opened their letters with focused expressions, except for Solrang, whose eyes sparkled as she eagerly unfolded hers. It marked the start of another chapter in their shared destiny. Before they did anything else, Yusha suggested they reread the previous letter. Since the new instructions required close attention, Solrang remarked with excitement that only Yusha had been able to read them before. She explained that since Alan had given each of them their own message, it meant he had decided it was time for everyone to see the orders themselves. The letter left Solrang and the others confused. The kitten-like girl clumsily repeated the first line of Alan's message. She said it read, asking how they had been lately, mentioning that they seemed to have many talented friends, and assuring them that if they needed anything, they could reach out to him. Renee commented that it sounded like ordinary chatter, but Yusha smiled. She explained that he had been disguising his orders as everyday conversations from the very beginning. She held up another message and told them to look. This had been his first real order after the greeting letter. He had written asking how she was doing and saying he was fine, then added that his second brother had used him as a chair that day. He wrote that it was funny, and said he wanted to send letters sometimes, asking her to reply if she agreed and if she was fine with the child he had sent. And from there, the letter continued. He had set the target for elimination, assigned missions, and instructed them to report afterward. Solrang shrugged and said that to her. The letters still looked like normal conversations, and maybe Yusha was reading too much into it. Yusha lifted another letter and told them to check this one. It thanked her for replying and asked her to update him monthly on what happened in the orphanage. It said he would leave the place to them and that together they would do well. She explained that this was when he had entrusted Blue Moon to her. Everyone could see that he had picked each of them personally, and the group buzzed with excitement. Deus nodded, saying it made sense since it reduced the chance of information leaking. Yusha reminded them that they needed to understand the instructions clearly and carry them out. Deus wondered aloud if it would be better to visit Alan in person or use a magic communicator. Raiden agreed, pointing out that if leaks were an issue, letters seemed risky. But Yusha, with a serious look, reminded them that their task was simply to follow Alan's orders. She held her letter tightly, and Deus sighed at her unwavering devotion. Solrang, full of energy, urged them to read their missions properly. Moments later, after checking his assignment, Deus explained that Alan had instructed him to travel to Caliban, the nation of knights. Solrang scoffed, saying that her task was in a barren colony, meaning a desert which she disliked. Raiden shared that he had been sent to Raxos, the entertainment city. Renee said she had been ordered to go to Larthania, the mage city. Finally, Yusha, looking as striking as ever, announced that she had been assigned to the Holy Kingdom of Rosario. The letters contained everything they needed. Deus mentioned that he did not understand why, but Alan had told him to become a knight. Solrang added that Alan had told her not to worry because their patronage would continue. Renee pointed out that he had listed the locations of their gifts. Raiden said calmly that they would understand everything once they reached their posts. Yusha reminded them that until Alan himself mentioned it first, they must never speak the name Blue Moon. Everyone agreed and prepared for departure. The next morning, they gathered and set out to fulfill Alan's orders. 3 months later, inside his office, Alan sighed. As expected, there was no noticeable change in the magic formulas or phrases. He muttered that he would need to experiment on his own. He looked at Evan and asked how the investigation into Leo's killers was going. Evan replied that the information guild still had no results. Alan frowned slightly and asked if there was anything else. Then he murmured that the butterfly effect caused by saving the 5 deadly sins had already spun out of control. Even Loria, who should have died in the story, had become the Duke of Altea. Now she was expanding her reach and influence at a frightening pace in the underworld. Alan let out a weary sigh and told Evan they should stop searching for the assassin. He already carried too much. Evan looked startled and asked if he was certain. Alan explained that the situation was obvious. In a world like this, sometimes not knowing was safer. In a place where almost nothing escaped the Information Guild's network, even he felt uneasy. If he tried to uncover things he was never meant to touch, the consequences could be far worse. If a single wrong step led directly to death, then the investigation held no meaning. Organizations like that would never harm him unless he interfered with them first. There was no reason for any secret group to target him unless he approached them. That was why he believed there was no point in continuing to pursue the truth behind Leo's death. Evan nodded and said he would tell the guild to stop. Then he remembered something else. He said that Deus had been appointed as a knight in Caliban. Alan looked up, surprised. He said it was impressive news. 3 months later, Evan returned carrying snacks and said he had something new to report. Alan asked what it was. Evan explained that Deus had created an entire knight order. Alan straightened. A knight order? That meant he had to be at least an expert or higher. He wondered aloud if he could already be close to a sword master. He recalled that the first level was sword user, the next sword expert, and then sword master. He grew quiet, noting that not much time had passed since his appointment. People across the continent were talking, claiming the world would see a 5th Master Knight within 10 years. Alan raised an eyebrow and asked if by Master Knight they meant the one known as the Sword of Caliban. Evan answered yes, saying the individual was incredibly talented. Caliban was in chaos, with people gathering to follow the rising star. 6 months later, nearly a full year since the 5 deadly sins had left the orphanage, Alan had become more settled in his duties as count. Evan rushed in once again with urgent news. Alan asked what it was. Evan said that Deus had officially become the Sword of Caliban. Alan froze. That meant only one thing. He had become the 5th Master Knight. He said calmly that only a Sword Master could rise to the rank of Master Knight. The Sword Master of Psychedelia was a being who had surpassed the Aura Blade and gained a unique ability called derivation. He looked at Evan and asked if he was truly claiming that Deus had become a Sword Master already. Evan quickly explained that Deus was on the verge of becoming a Sword Master. He said that although Deus had not yet created his derivation, the nation had still granted him the title of Master Knight. Evan added that not only had Deus defeated the 4th sword in a duel, but Caliban had also lost one of its Master Knights to the Northern Barbarians. Alan paused and remarked that the war had been ongoing for more than a decade. Evan continued, saying that realizing mana and learning to move it took about 15 years, while creating a derivation usually required several decades. He mentioned that the first sword, Reinhardt, had reached the title of youngest Master Knight at 32. Evan said that Reinhardt had practiced swordsmanship since he was 5 and remained undefeated, yet even he needed more than 20 years to reach that level. And now a boy who once knew nothing about swords, Deus, was rising to master status. Alan's eyes widened. He said that if Deus only lacked derivation, then he was close to surpassing Reinhardt himself. A faint smile crossed Alan's face as he wondered if he might benefit from Deus sooner than expected, or perhaps not. He looked down at the letter again, murmuring that maybe there was nothing more he needed to do. Holding the letter, he noted that Yusha was the only one who ever wrote back to him. Even after she left for the Holy Kingdom, she continued sending them without fail. Each letter carried updates about the 5 deadly sins she had grown up with. It seemed they remained close. Alan sighed and said that although none of them had ever seen his face, they could have at least thanked him for the gifts. His tone dipped with disappointment. He paused, then lightly slapped his own cheek and corrected himself. He said that he should be grateful they hadn't destroyed the kingdom after awakening as the 5 deadly sins. As long as they were living well, he was happy. The scene shifted to Caliban, the central region of Kurdum, home to high-ranking nobles. There stood the grand estate of the illustrious solar eclipse knights, Versailles. Inside, knights trained tirelessly. At the top of the mansion stood Deus, now clad in full knight uniform. He appeared imposing, composed, and strikingly handsome. His name echoed throughout Caliban. Deus Michaelian, captain of the Solar Eclipse Knight Order, youngest Master Knight. A girl waved at him joyfully, calling out to him as her brother. Deus smiled back. He looked far more controlled than during his youth. He smirked softly, still embarrassed by memories of those days. He recalled losing everything to those black forces, how his sister had been swallowed by the darkness. Deus had been overwhelmed with rage, desperately trying to protect her. Those things dragged him into darkness repeatedly, driving him to the brink of imprisonment. He had sunk completely. Even the great moon saving his life had barely been enough. He had pledged allegiance out of desperation, believing it was his only remaining path. He remembered Yusha's voice and the promise he made to take revenge with his own hands. Serving under Blue Moon had placed him in countless perilous missions. He never complained, never hesitated. Each assignment became another step toward confronting the Black Forces. Years later, he finally received his first personal order. When he opened the letter, confusion hit him. The instructions differed from anything Blue Moon had ever given. They led him to a small inn in southern Caliban, where he was told to retrieve a gift. Initially, he didn't care. Gifts meant nothing to someone who had lost everything, but when he arrived, Deus immediately understood what Alan had given him. The gift was his sister, alive and safe, waiting for him. His eyes trembled. Deus broke apart. Tears spilled uncontrollably as he ran forward and embraced her with shaking arms. His sister stared at him, unable to believe what she was seeing. To him, she was more precious than his own life. His little sister, whom he believed dead, was alive and trembling with a mix of relief and pain. He asked her what had happened after he lost her. Silly cried as she held onto his arm, offering a small reassuring smile. Later, they sat together with cups of tea. When she calmed down, she began recounting everything. She explained that after being dragged away by those creatures, she had been locked in darkness for a long time. The memories returned vividly as she spoke. She described being confined in a pitch-black cage, waiting for her turn to be taken out and killed. When her moment came, someone incredibly strong appeared, grabbed her hand, and pulled her into the light, helping her escape. Years later, when she was nearly sold to a slave merchant, another powerful figure had protected her again. She said a single strike wiped out her captors, saving her for the second time. That rescuer was Alan's knight, Evan, who saved Silly, Deus's sister. Returning to the present, Silly explained that after those events, she received precious medicine from a sponsor. She repeated Alan's words as she held the letter tightly. In the letter, Alan said he would continue sending medicine and support, that she was safe under the name of Palacio, and that she should not worry about her sibling. She said she was very grateful for everything he had done. Deus realized the Great Moon had been protecting her under his own name. He couldn't understand how the Great Moon even knew their situation. He knew he had never spoken to anyone about his family. Only Yusha had ever noticed the black lamp that had dragged him down. Growing tense, he gripped his shoulders and wondered how the Great Moon knew everything. Everyone saw him as a prodigy behind countless hidden stories, someone who seemed to understand every secret. Memories stirred in Deus's mind. Images tied to Yusha overlapped, confusion and disbelief building until everything snapped into clarity. It all aligned perfectly. He finally understood the nervous tone Yusha always carried when she mentioned the Great Moon, her anxious voice, and her constant reminder that a sword could never act without its master. Darkness crept over his thoughts as he realized that he had been the foolish one. Yet a sliver of hope remained. He remembered hearing that good things would happen, and that the Great Moon already knew everything and had been leaving hints for the child forced to survive alone. His body trembled as the truth settled over him. Silly snapped him out of his spiraling thoughts and asked if he was all right. Inside, Deus understood that his sword had dared to act alone, yet the Great Moon had still shown mercy. He imagined how the Great Moon had guided his life like a carefully arranged plan, controlling every step without forcing his hand. He whispered that he had spent years drowning in hatred and revenge toward the Black Sheep. He looked at his sister. Her smile carried the brightness of someone who had endured long years of fear and finally escaped it. She had survived because of the Great Moon, and their family had been protected. To Deus, her survival felt like a blessing beyond measure. Yusha's words echoed in his thoughts. She had always said he would one day understand why she followed that man. Deus remembered the letter that sent him to Caliban and made him a knight. Now he finally understood why. Determination sharpened his expression. He declared to himself that to repay the Great Moon, he would rise to the pinnacle of Caliban, become a master knight, and build a knight order filled with the greatest swordsmen. Later, a tall knight approached and said the time had come. Deus stepped forward and glanced down at the assembled knight order. He announced that this expedition would become the first stepping stone for the eclipse. Hardship meant nothing to him. Gripping his mesmerizing yet fearsome sword, he declared that he awaited the day he could properly repay the Great Moon, the day he could offer true gratitude. His eyes carried a dark, unwavering resolve. His loyalty toward the prodigy of their era remained unbroken. He vowed to prove himself beneath the moon's light. With that, the solar eclipse knights set out to wage battle against the barbarians. Alan, sitting quietly outside, remarked to himself that everything felt strangely peaceful now, perhaps because all his children had grown and gone their own way. A sudden gust sent several pages flying. Alan scrambled to catch them, muttering that they were all blowing away. He half joked to himself, wondering if this could be taken as some sort of sign. Then he steadied his thoughts and went back to his research. He finally understood why he kept writing in cursive between lines. After returning from the labyrinth, he had spent all his time revisiting the strange phrases he had encountered there. He let out a small laugh, pleased that his reports were finally completed. Leaning back, he reviewed the concepts he had been analyzing. Refraction, the reinforcement of imperfections in magic, and the behavior of refraction inside spells. He noted that refraction boosted the flaws within a completed spell, allowing its range to stretch further. Repulsion distorted the internal structure and affected the path of a fired projectile. The phenomenon fascinated him. He wrote that blue light reinforced parallel magic, including electrical spells. He referenced the spell he used in the dungeon, explaining that the line of diffraction granted penetration, creating a devastating effect on impact. When he struck the golems in the labyrinth, the massive creature had been completely annihilated despite its size. He carefully recorded phrase rules, essential to activating his spells. If any rule failed, the spell collapsed. He reminded himself. No repeating the same spell, no mismatched phrases, and a maximum of 4 phrases allowed. But with his current mana, he could only cast 1 spell per day. It had taken him a long time to grasp even this much. He grew thoughtful, remembering the limits of this world. The hand signs and phrases of Babylonia had long vanished from history. No written record survived, so he had to rebuild everything on his own from scattered remnants. Even so, he found the challenge strangely enjoyable. Although he had originally learned magic only for self-defense, he now pressed his fingers together and prepared the spell he had been refining for 2 months. A crackling purple light formed before him. Alan calmly described the result aloud, saying that removing the focal point of the monosphere created an imbalance that sparked lightning. A small sphere of purple lightning hovered in the air. Alan called it weak and useless, merely a fixation of his curiosity. But the moment he finished the chant, a wave of thunder rippled outward. Completing the structure, he chanted, "Compression." The condensed magic cannon tightened as the phrases broke apart and reassembled. At the final moment, he formed the last hand sign, triggering the spell's intended effect. A violent thunder cannon blasted skyward, flooding the area with tremendous energy. The ground trembled as brilliant blue lightning streaked across the field. Alan realized that the order of the spell mattered. He recalled that when he tried using breakdown first, the spell collapsed immediately. Then a voice rang behind him. Someone exclaimed that it was impossible. Alan turned sharply. His expression froze the moment he saw who had arrived. Kalia, the red-haired woman known as the villain of her kingdom, stood there with her butler. Her eyes were locked onto the lightning that lingered in the sky. Her butler's voice trembled as he said that it was clearly origin magic and that using origin magic placed someone at the level of a seven-circle mage. Alan stiffened as he absorbed the term. Origin magic. The hierarchy rose from 1 to 8 circles, with 8 being the pinnacle a mage could reach. He was stunned to hear that what he created could be mistaken for origin magic. Later, inside Count Palacio's reception room, Kalia and her butler sat waiting for Alan. She had come for 2 clear reasons. First, to confirm what his intentions were, since she knew he had the power to heavily damage Xenonia County. Second, to gauge the level of the mysterious organization protecting him, the group that helped him seize control over Palacio. Instead, she had witnessed an overwhelming display of magic. She never imagined she would see V-Uncle, the arrogant mage at her side, trembling openly. He was a 5th circle mage exiled from the tower for inhuman experiments, a man who could destroy an entire battalion with ease. Kalia had funded him for years, yet he had always spoken down to her. But today, he was afraid. She had never seen him like this. Her thoughts shook. She questioned whether what they had seen truly was origin magic and what kind of being our protagonist actually was. Alan entered the room. His cold gaze pressed the entire space into silence. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He asked them why they had come to his county. Kalia apologized for the sudden visit, saying she only wished to. Alan cut her off with a single icy glance. He said he would not blame her, daughter of Xenonia. His tone remained calm, but the weight behind it froze them where they sat. He said he needed to make one thing clear. Taking a single step forward, he seemed to bend the light around him. He said that what they had seen was not origin magic. His eyes sharpened. If they needed a label for his ability, he said he was only at the 2nd circle. The room sank into suffocating silence. His presence conveyed everything. A quiet pressure that demanded obedience, a coldness that commanded stillness without a word. He explained again that what they witnessed was not origin magic, that it was useless for offense and defense, that it had no real value. But his explanation was not an explanation, it was a warning. A warning to stay silent about what they had seen. Or at least that's what they thought. Alan didn't mean it that way though. The message landed. Kalia and the mage trembled visibly, unable to hold on to their earlier confidence. The mage was the first to break. He bowed deeply and said that Alan was correct, that he must have been mistaken. It was shocking to see V-Uncle, who prided himself on knowledge, speak so gently, so submissively. Meanwhile, Alan leaned back on the sofa, utterly relaxed, radiating the effortless dominance of someone who feared nothing. He said he was satisfied. Then he moved on and asked again why they were here. Kalia hesitated before answering that she had finished some business nearby and thought she should visit. Alan didn't even blink. He said that if she had no real reason to be here, then he unfortunately had work to return to and could not spare more time. Kalia immediately stood and said that she understood, thanking him for granting her a moment and declaring that they would take their leave. But before they reached the door, Alan spoke again. His voice stayed calm, steady, carrying a quiet authority that made the air feel heavy. He said that if she ever needed someone to speak with, she should visit Duchess Altea. He added that he believed the two of them would get along. Kalia paused, confused by the mention of Altea. She bowed respectfully and replied that if he said so, she would pay the Duchess a visit. Then she continued walking out with Venkel. Outside the estate, Kalia and Venkel climbed into their carriage while Alan watched them depart from the entrance beside his subordinate. Evan asked why a noble from Xenonia County had come all the way here, wondering how a fallen Western family ended up approaching their territory. Alan exhaled and said he had no idea. His expression dimmed. He thought to himself that if rumors spread about him using origin magic, every battle-hungry lunatic in the shadows would swarm his doorstep. He hoped they had understood the warning. He didn't want unnecessary trouble. He assured himself there was no way someone from Xenonia would actually visit the Altea Duchy. Nobles were not meant to involve themselves in the underworld. He prayed this would be the end of the matter. Inside the carriage, Kalia finally asked whether Count Palacio had truly used origin magic. Venkel immediately shook his head and said he hadn't. She asked why he reacted with such shock then. His face paled as he explained. He said that origin magic drew its own laws on the unchanging structure of the world, a privilege granted only to the highest tier mages. But what the Count used was something else entirely. He swallowed hard and said that he had used his observing eye to examine the spell. He admitted that what he saw was not someone following the rules of magic but someone tearing the rules apart. Kalia froze. Venkel said the Count had twisted absolute, immutable principles. He had anchored lightning, warped natural laws, collapsed the magical structure, and even after destroying every foundation, the spell had still manifested. Venkel clutched his head as he spoke, describing it as an impossible miracle. Kalia's face darkened in fear. Venkel added that the presence they felt afterward was not just magical pressure but the aura of forgotten gods. His voice cracked as he said he had studied ancient magic in his youth and had been praised for his knowledge. That was why he urged her with absolute certainty. They must never oppose Count Palacio. Kalia exhaled shakily. She murmured that even someone like her could not understand his intentions. Venkel nodded weakly. Kalia remembered Alan's final advice. Visit Duchess Altea. She now understood she had likely already been moved into position as one of his pieces on the board. 5 months passed. 2 years had gone by since the children left the orphanage. Alan asked Evan for any news, preferably about the children. Evan shook his head and said it wasn't about them, then revealed that Xenonia County and the Altea Duchy had formed an alliance. Alan felt as if lightning struck his skull. The top 2 powers in the underworld, joining forces? Evan explained that the underworld had its own rules, and no outsiders should know, but the rumor was reliable. Alan's heart pounded. He had worked hard to separate the 5 sins from the path of destruction, yet now he faced an alliance between 2 masterminds. He wondered if the Asteria Kingdom was on the verge of collapsing and questioned why Kalia had taken his offhand suggestion so seriously back then. He shook away the negative speculation. He told himself it was likely temporary. Kalia was too cold and too proud to maintain a long-term alliance. Still, the development bothered him. He sat down and wrote a letter. He stated in it that he apologized if he ever seemed blunt or distant, adding that he wasn't skilled with words and hoped he wouldn't be misunderstood. He sealed the letter and handed it to Evan, instructing him to deliver it to Xenonia County. Evan said he would send it through the Mercenary Guild and added that he would continue keeping watch over the children. Alan leaned back with a quiet sigh and wondered aloud how Raiden and Silrang were doing. He said he hoped they were safe, since he hadn't heard from them after Yusha's letter confirming they reached their destinations. Looking through the window toward the dim evening sky, he muttered a fear that Silrang might be wandering the streets, unable to survive. Yet he reminded himself that if she had found the item he mentioned in the letter, she would rise to the peak of all fighters, the Baba Yaga. He recalled the description of the essence of the Golden Mane tribe, a relic said to boost critical strike rate by 20% upon absorption. The item's old description claimed that if the sin of pride had obtained it, she would never have fallen into corruption but instead awakened as a great wolfkin. He had given Silrang the location of a treasure he originally planned to save for emergencies. He muttered that she was talented and capable enough to earn her own fortune. She should be fine. At least, he hoped so. Night settled over the desert colony, the nation where fighters ruled and strength alone decided everything. Under the moonlit dunes, Silrang walked forward, step by step. She had finally completed the trial. A radiant golden aura swirled around her like a living flame. She raised her head and whispered her thanks to the great moon, her voice trembling with joy rather than fear. She admitted she once believed the essence of the Golden Mane tribe was only a legend. She laughed softly, filled with relief and disbelief. She said that as a child, she thought the stories were mere fairy tales, but she now understood they were real. The Wolfkin, descendants of the greatest beast kings, the Golden Mane tribe. For centuries, the essence had been hidden, lost, sought, and protected. Yet now she held it. No, she had become one with it. Her body glowed with brilliant yellow light that surged like the sun itself. Beneath the glowing moon, Silrang trembled with overflowing mana. She called the great moon her benefactor, saying he had saved her from dying during those biological experiments and had gifted her the strength she now held. Her fists tightened. She declared that she would avenge her parents. The black dragon who had murdered them, she vowed to tear him apart with her own hands. Mana spiraled around her in a storm. She guided it with precision, feeding it into her limbs, spine, and soul. She said she was certain he had not saved her just to become some mediocre gladiator. Her aura exploded upward. She declared that she would become the strongest gladiator of the desert colony. She said she would revive the Golden Mane tribe, gather the scattered wolfkin, and kill the black dragon with the strength she had been given. She punched the air. A thunderous shockwave erupted, scattering sand for meters. She stood tall, wrapped in golden radiance like a royal mantle. She whispered that everything she would do from now on was for him. She turned from the trial grounds. She said it was time to begin. Her final words rolled across the moonlit sky. After 500 years, the Golden Mane tribe, the great kings of Beastkin, would rise again beneath the blue moon. Alan sits with Evan as usual, idly flipping through documents while listening to him talk. Evan mentions that the Information Guild finally uncovered details about the children known as the 5 Great Sins. He admits, somewhat sheepishly, that he was supposed to report this earlier but forgot. Alan casually asks what they found, and Evan explains that Solrang is thriving in the colony, to the point that people there now call her the Golden Flash. The nickname feels oddly familiar to Alan, as if he has heard it somewhere before, but the memory refuses to surface. Even so, he is genuinely relieved to know Solrang is doing well. Evan adds that in that territory, strength determines everything. Anyone can rise to any position if they are powerful enough. Intrigued, Alan asks about Raiden, since he has not heard anything since Radon arrived in the entertainment city of Raxus. Evan replies that there is some information, but the guild is still verifying it. Alan immediately calls Evan out for relaxing instead of preparing. Evan looks confused and says that he already completed all his tasks, but Alan reminds him that he was supposed to start preparations for their journey to the Magic Tower, a trip that would take at least a month. Evan reacts with clear shock, saying he had no idea they were heading to a Magic Tower at all. Alan briefly wonders if he truly forgot to mention it, while Evan, already accustomed to Alan's sudden decisions, sighs and complains that a month sounds excessive. He says that reaching the Green Magic Tower should take only a week. Alan corrects him, explaining that their destination is the Blue Magic Tower instead. Evan asks if he means the one near the Labyrinth City, acknowledging that the journey would indeed be long. Still, he reassures Alan that he will start preparing immediately. Once Evan leaves, Alan grumbles to himself about his own laziness. The idea of being stuck in a carriage for an entire month already exhausts him. Even so, he reminds himself that he has no choice, since the item that could fix his small, precious mana hole awaits him there. His thoughts drift to the Labyrinth City and the memories it brings from his gaming days. He remembers spending countless hours grinding there. The massive labyrinth at the city's core was Psychedelia's most famous leveling zone. Players could obtain better items by leveling up and descending deeper into its depths. Despite the endless crowds, no one ever reached the bottom. The developers kept adding floors, driving players mad. Even those who used cheat codes to reach floor 150 found that the labyrinth simply continued without end. Just like in the game, labyrinths in this world constantly produce relics and artifacts. Because of that, official magic appraisers have become extremely valuable, with wealth practically guaranteed. One such appraiser is Rini, the embodiment of greed. Alan reflects that with her talents, she must have passed the appraiser exams effortlessly. Still, he cannot help wondering if the gift he gave her was underwhelming compared to what the other children received. After all, it was merely an item that appraised other items. He considers whether he should provide her with additional support if the gift falls short, but decides that is a problem for another day. In the labyrinth city of Larthania, where the streets twist as confusingly as the maze beneath it, there is no true governing authority. The city serves as a haven for explorers and mercenaries. Past the dense cluster of shops in the southern district lies a hidden appraisal shop known as Murdy. Though tucked away, it has earned a strong reputation, catering mostly to nobles and A-rank explorers. Even the Lord of Larthania, a man with a distinctive beard, is a regular patron. The shop is run by Rin, who works while wearing a mask to hide her face. She finishes appraising a mana-powered flame item for the Lord and explains that it can be imprinted. When he asks what that means, she explains that by supplying a small amount of mana, the flames can burn continuously for an hour. The Lord is delighted by the dramatic increase in efficiency. Rin clarifies that imprinting raises an item to a higher tier, though the exact effect depends on the item itself. After the customers leave, Rin removes her mask and notices a special item nearby. She picks it up and explains that it too can be imprinted. She says that this ability is the true reason her shop gained fame despite its location, calling it a blessing from the Great Moon. This item is the one Alan gave her. Alan believes it only appraises items, unaware that it also possesses the power to upgrade them. Rin smiles as she recalls how confused she was when Alan first suggested she become an appraiser. At the time, she believed him to be a mysterious being from the age of the forgotten outer gods and assumed his actions were part of a plan to eradicate the entities responsible for taking Deus's sister. When she was ordered to move to the Labyrinth City and become an appraiser, She could not understand how that would help fight such beings. Only after receiving the gift did things begin to make sense. The item is called the Eye of the Stalker. It identifies objects that fall below a certain mana threshold, acting as an assistant for appraising. But that was only its surface function. Rin, born with the ancient library, immediately realized that the item existed in no known records. When she broke its seal, its true imprinting function activated, allowing it to handle up to 500 items. As usual, she misinterprets Alan's intentions, believing he knew everything and gifted her the item so she could grow strong enough to oppose the dark forces. To fully awaken the item, she must offer 500 unique items as sacrifices. She has already sacrificed 248 and gleefully notes that only 252 remain. However, the item only accepts high-tier relics. Offering a low-tier relic resets all progress, forcing her to appraise every item carefully before sacrificing it. She grows increasingly strange, clutching the item and declaring that their great master must have known she alone was suited for this role because of her bond with the ancient library. She insists that everything she does serves his grand will and that all events will unfold according to the will of the great moon. Her devotion becomes unsettling. 3 weeks later, Alan finally arrives at the Blue Magic Tower. Inside, he meets the Vice Tower Master, Fenya Crazon, a Sixth Circle mage. She is a petite woman who bluntly tells him to state his business or leave, catching him off guard with her rudeness. As he looks at her, he realizes she is a character from Psychedelia. At this point in the timeline, she is still the Vice Master. In the game, she later became an 8th Circle mage by age 20 and the Master of the Blue Tower. Alan reflects that magic towers are not only centers of power but also control the production of essential goods, granting them influence equal to nobility. Despite Fenya's overwhelming strength, her dismissive tone irritates him. He introduces himself as the Count of Palladio and explains that he came to address the Time Gate, but Fenya brushes him off. He repeats that he is there to deal with it. The Time Gate is a rift to a subspace that forms in areas saturated with magic, causing destruction and instability. Fenya uses observation magic on him and mocks him, questioning what someone with such little talent could possibly do. She tells him to leave. Alan stands there in disbelief, while Evan watches silently without offering support. When Alan presses her again, Fenya snaps that many have promised to close the Time Gate before him and all have failed. Alan insists he is serious and only needs directions. Internally, he wonders why she is being so difficult and feels unfairly treated. Fenya then remarks that he needs a major achievement to sway public opinion, especially since people believe he became a count purely by luck after all his siblings died. She releases a surge of mana and warns him that he cannot simply barge into a magic tower and act important. Alan is shocked and wonders who has been spreading such rumors. He admits to himself that he has been inactive for years and that people thinking he has grown soft is not entirely wrong, though it should not matter. He also notices that despite her obsessive work habits, Fenya is disturbingly well informed about outside affairs. Seeing her power firsthand drains his irritation and replaces it with unease. Evan quietly warns him that confronting her directly would end badly. Still, driven by desperation, Alan steps forward and declares that if he fails to eliminate the Time Gate, he will surrender all his property to the Magic Tower. Fenya initially assumes he is joking, but he insists he is willing to swear an oath. This surprises her enough that she agrees to guide him. Upon arriving at the Time Gate, she reminds him that all his wealth will become hers if he fails. Alan responds with confidence, stating that such an outcome is impossible. Fenya sees this as a chance to assess the man rumored to lead the underworld. Observing his mana hole, she concludes that he has survived on luck alone. While she acknowledges his otherworldly presence, the reality is that his mana capacity is tiny, his energy sensing barely second circle, and his overall talent underwhelming. She cannot help wondering how he intends to resolve a Time Gate with abilities like these. Alan reflects that there was never any real need to worry about closing the Time Gate. According to what he knows, it would naturally vanish after 3 months, once it released the relic he was after. That was where all recorded research ended, and no mage powerful enough to seal it was ever meant to appear. Ironically, the Time Gate at the Blue Magic Tower continued causing destruction for more than 2 years. As Alan begins forming a Babylonia hand sign, Fenya mocks him again, saying that using hand gestures instead of a staff is outdated. She remarks that even ancient tomes describe hand signs as a crude, almost fairy tale method. While she is focused on ridiculing him, Alan starts casting. In an instant, everything falls into absolute silence. Fenya is struck by a sudden sense of dread. Activating her eyes of observation, she tries to understand what is happening, but instead of clarity, overwhelming fear floods her senses. Above Alan, a massive, sinister eye manifests, gazing down as if monitoring his very existence. It becomes clear that when the unknown entity granted Alan the ability to interfere with the laws of reality, it also chose to watch him closely, either to restrain him or ensure compliance. Fenya understands that her eyes of observation allow her to see the essence of magic itself, yet what she perceives now cannot be interpreted. It feels like touching forbidden knowledge, an instinctive warning that enlightenment itself is lethal. The fear alone tells her she has crossed a line. Then a colossal hand appears, commanding her not to move. An absolute silent zone is imposed. Fenya is drenched in sweat, fully aware that continuing to observe would mean death. The moment Alan finishes casting, the eye vanishes as if it was never there. Alan turns around, completely unaware of what just occurred, and calmly tells Fenya that the time gate has been sealed. Internally, he thinks it was effortless, thanks to a technique he learned from the game. He adds that since he sealed it, he will be taking the relic. The relic is a black bracelet, similar in appearance to the ring of restrictions he obtained before. Seeing Fenya's pale expression, Alan panics, thinking she caught him abusing some glitch or strange magic. Fenya, still shaken by what she believes was a godlike presence, hurriedly assures him she will not tell anyone. Alan misunderstands her reaction and assumes his bluff worked. He thanks her for keeping quiet, and Fenya agrees fervently. Neither understands the other. Alan believes she is referring to the time gate, while Fenya believes Alan is concealing his true identity as an eldritch being. Fenya struggles to suppress the truth, while Alan is confused by her sudden politeness. The entity only manifests when Alan uses magic that violates the world's laws, and only those with observation magic can perceive it. Oblivious to all of this, Alan tells Evan it is time to leave. Evan, who remains seated the entire time, follows without comment. Before they depart, Fenya nervously calls out and offers Alan several mana potions, trying to make amends for her earlier behavior. Alan examines them and explains that homemade mana potions from the Vice Tower Master are extremely valuable. He freezes when he realizes that just 2 of them are worth his entire mansion. Seeing his reaction, Fenya assumes she offended him and panics, promising again to protect his secret. Alan, meanwhile, thinks she is simply expressing gratitude for sealing the time gate. In her desperation, Fenya proposes a mana oath to ensure her silence. Alan wonders why something so extreme is necessary but does not stop her. She immediately performs the ritual. Mana chains form, binding her life to Alan's. If the oath is broken, she would die. She anxiously asks if she performed it correctly and insists she is excellent at keeping promises. Overwhelmed and introverted, Alan decides it is not worth correcting the misunderstanding. He leaves with the relic he wanted, 5 mana potions, and a life-binding oath he never asked for. On the carriage ride back, Evan asks whether the rough-looking bracelet is really the reward for sealing the time gate. He questions its value. Alan admits he does not fully know what it is, only that he needs it. He explains that it is called the Mark of the Corrupted and that it absorbs and stores mana. The faint glow of the gem confirms it is working. He adds that while it does not store much mana, it still holds more than his own mana pool. Realizing that a support item surpasses him wipes the smile from his face, though he reassures himself that it is meant for exploration and self-defense, not combat. Evan watches Alan mutter through this internal pep talk in confusion. Alan thinks back to Fenya's strange behavior and recalls similar reactions from Lady Kalia and Vionkel. Since he cannot see the entity above him when he casts magic, he remains baffled by the fear it inspires in high-level mages. Though unsettled, he dismisses it, believing he will not meet them again. Enjoying the pleasant weather, Alan relaxes as they arrive at the Altea Docula estate. Loria is hosting a tea party with Lady Kalia, and the two appear genuinely close. Loria explains that she feels comfortable around Kalia since rank and power do not complicate their relationship. Kalia thanks Alan indirectly, praising his insight. They recall how Alan's suggestion led Kalia to visit the Duchess of Altea. That meeting made both women realize how deeply he had influenced them, prompting them to form an alliance under what they believed were his unspoken orders. Unaware of this, Alan has no idea such an agreement exists. Convinced that resisting absolute power is pointless, the Zenonia and Altea families become allies. Loria asks why Kalia visited early, and Kalia explains she received a discreet letter from Alan. It is his apology letter. Though clearly meant as an apology, both women completely misinterpret it. They conclude it is a covert command to eliminate troublesome nobles. They analyze his comment about lacking noble friends and compare political factions. Since Alan interacted with none of the major figures, they conclude he opposes all existing nobles. Despite briefly mentioning common sense, they abandon it entirely and decide Alan intends to dismantle the current nobility and establish a new order. Loria reasons this must be why he made her a duchess. Together, they agree to begin preparations. With nothing but an apology letter, Alan unknowingly ignites a noble purge. Back at the Blue Magic Tower, the Tower Master returns. Fenya reports that Count Palacio sealed the time gate. When asked for details, she is too overwhelmed to speak. Her silence confirms the Tower Master's suspicions, and all signs point back to Alan. Meanwhile, the oblivious Alan enjoys roasted sweet potatoes with Evan at their campsite, complaining about wanting to go home. He thinks it is about time Udia received his letter. Elsewhere, it is noted that the Eye of Observation is a skill all high circle mages are expected to possess, usually awakening around the 6th circle. Vinkel unlocked it at that stage, while Fenya was born with it. Finally, Selim Micardo, the 8th circle Tower Master of the Blue Magic Tower, realizes the time gate has vanished. Seeing Fenya utterly drained, he asks if anything unusual occurred during his absence. Fenya replies that she completed all assigned tasks, leaving Selim deeply unsettled by her uncharacteristic behavior. The Tower Master studies Fenya in silence, unsettled by how subdued she looks. Normally, she would be pestering him non-stop, but now she barely reacts. He reflects on how she became the Vice Tower Master of the Blue Tower at an absurdly young age, carried there by overwhelming talent. Alongside that talent came an arrogance so sharp it cut through everyone around her. Compared to her peers, she was a monster, notorious for tormenting them without mercy. He even recalls a time when she reduced a rookie mage to tears 77 times in a single day. He admits to himself that he never tried to correct her personality. Her magical ability was simply too valuable. He assumed that once she reached the 7th circle, she would naturally realize the limits of her own brilliance and mellow out. Seeing her now, shaken and withdrawn, feels deeply wrong. He wonders who could possibly possess enough power to humble a genius like Fenya. Trying to ease the tension, he casually mentions that his trip to the north felt longer than expected and asks if anything notable occurred while he was gone. Fenya only responds with a hollow stare. After a long pause, she finally says that Count Palacio closed the time gate. She adds that due to an oath she took, she cannot explain how it was done, and there is nothing more she is allowed to say. The Tower Master is left with more questions than answers, but he slowly pieces together the truth. Whatever Fenya witnessed was not ordinary magic. It was something closer to origin magic. Realizing this, he gently runs his fingers through her hair. She does not slap his hand away as she normally would, confirming just how frightened she is. Amused and intrigued, he decides that visiting Count Palacio himself is inevitable. A month passes after Alan's return from the Blue Magic Tower, which means 2 months have gone by including the journey. Alan is back at his estate, practicing magic with his usual composed expression. He reflects that after acquiring the mark of corruption, he began researching magic phrases with genuine dedication. Being able to cast magic multiple times a day changed everything. Through relentless experimentation, he discovers strict rules governing magic phrases. Phrases must align properly, repetitions within a single spell are impossible, and no more than 4 phrases can be stacked at once. He also realizes that similar phrases can overlap in effect, while others require precise preparation. As he records his findings, he notices that some phrases behave differently depending on their placement, though the exact mechanics remain unclear. To him, phrases are a form of mana visualization. When he carefully imagines a spell like a fireball in advance, the result differs drastically from casting without intent. Evan remarks that Alan's magic grows stronger by the day, but Alan only sighs. Evan insists that even before, Alan's magic far exceeded standard second circle spells, and now it looks even more dangerous. The massive crater in the garden is proof enough. Alan admits that ordinary second-circle gravity magic could never create such destruction. His version feels capable of annihilating armies. He briefly feels smug, pleased that his growth is real, especially when Evan praises how unique and impressive his magic is. Still, Alan explains that the increase is not due to talent or phrases alone. True improvement comes from precision and understanding. Phrases are merely triggers that alter attributes. He explains that he spent months refining gravity magic using nearly identical phrases in rotation, slowly optimizing their arrangement. Power increased gradually, not suddenly. He teasingly tells Evan that he must be imagining things, suggesting his strength only feels greater because he is healthier and in a better mood. Evan nods, used to this deflection, then informs him that a letter from Yusha has arrived. Alan flushes slightly and says he will read it privately. He heads inside at once, claiming he has already used his daily limit of magic. Alone, Evan's earlier comments linger in his mind. He considers two explanations for his rising power. Reward or curse. A curse would require an Eastern ritual and a sacrifice, which he rules out immediately. Faith crosses his mind next, but as a minor count in an overlooked kingdom, he dismisses it. Deciding not to dwell on it, Alan chooses to keep living as usual. Far away, in the holy kingdom of Rosario, within the pure white capital of Reincarnated, the people worship Sharonia, goddess of the moon and peace. Inside the Eastern prayer house, Yusha prays quietly until a holy knight named Locke interrupts her. She turns to greet him, radiant in white. Locke struggles to reconcile her humble status as a nun with the overwhelming reverence he feels toward her. He reports that 8 children and 25 villagers were saved thanks to her guidance. Yusha insists the credit belongs to Locke and his team, but Locke counters that she was the one who taught him faith. He recalls spending 20 years unable to feel divine power, trapped in despair. When Yusha appeared, she told him that if he desired strength, he should place his faith in the moon. Confused but desperate, he followed her advice. After days of prayer, divine power awakened within him. Overjoyed, he continued, only later worrying he had strayed into heresy. Locke explains that the power he gained felt identical to divine power granted by the goddess, even functioning through sacred artifacts. When he questioned Yusha, she explained that faith comes from belief, but belief takes time, so relying on something tangible like the moon makes it easier. In truth, she is using the moon as a stand-in for Alan, since she cannot openly name him. Locke convinces himself that since the goddess is associated with the moon, his faith remains pure. He vows to continue believing. Yusha suggests they pray together, noting that a crowd has already gathered. She leads them, gracefully calling upon the great moon. Introduced again as a sister of Rosario, she stands at the center of a growing congregation. Without realizing it, Alan is becoming the focus of a new religion. Later, Evan reviews delivered mail, including a banquet invitation and a mercenary advertisement that accepts payment in virtually anything. Finally, the scene shifts to Alan Palacio's office. He sits quietly, rereading Yusha's letter. It contains nothing extraordinary, only details of her daily life. He exhales slowly. Nothing unusual means she is safe. Resting his forehead against the desk, letter in hand, he accepts that this is proof the children are living the peaceful lives he wanted for them. Still, a faint loneliness settles in his chest. Of the 5 children he guided away from sin, only Yusha still writes to him. The others remain silent, and Alan understands why. To them, he is only a figure from the past, someone who intervened briefly and then vanished. He tells himself this is acceptable. He never intended to be remembered or thanked. His role ended the moment they chose paths that would not lead to the destruction of the world. There is no reason to feel sad, he repeats internally, forcing himself to accept it. Still, fatigue shows clearly on his face. Despite her own busy life, Yusha continues to write to him regularly. Part of him finds comfort in that consistency, while another part feels a quiet ache he refuses to name. A voice suddenly speaks behind him. Evan asks whether Alan is busy. Startled, Alan lifts his head sharply, realizing he never noticed Evan entering the room. He remarks that Evan startled him and asks why he is still there. Evan replies calmly that he stayed because new intelligence arrived from the Information Guild. That immediately sharpens Alan's focus. He tells Evan to report. Evan explains that the information concerns one of the children. Alan urges him to continue. Evan states that the report is about Raiden. He explains that confirmed intelligence shows Raiden has become a pirate. Alan freezes. The word echoes in his mind. Piracy represents chaos, slaughter, and cruelty, a life far removed from what Alan envisioned for him. Suppressing his reaction, Alan demands the full report. Evan continues without hesitation. He explains that among all circulating rumors, the most significant involves Seoling and Deus. At Seolang's name, Alan's attention sharpens. Evan reports that she has achieved a 32-match win streak in official combat arenas. Out of the 100 wins required to earn the title Baba Yaga, she is already nearly one-third of the way there. The number hits Alan hard. He interrupts Evan and asks who currently holds the longest streak. Before Evan can answer, Alan recalls it himself. The Lion King, holder of a 41-win streak. Evan confirms this. Alan leans back, recalling the Lion King from the game. He was a force of nature, a temporary party member who dominated battlefields through sheer strength. He was not just powerful, but a symbol that maintained the colony's balance. And now Seoling is approaching that level. Alan mutters that she is close to surpassing even the strongest pillar of the colony. Pride and unease mix within him. Kid guided her to prevent her from becoming a calamity, yet her growth is now edging into monstrosity. Evan moves to the next report and speaks about Deus. He explains that Deus personally executed one of the 8 barbarian chiefs, Kurga of the Snowfield. Alan stiffens. Evan adds that Kurga led a faction that practiced grotesque blood rituals, transforming themselves into monsters. He asks cautiously whether Alan is familiar with them. Alan does not answer aloud. His thoughts drift to the past. In the game, he remembers who destroyed their god, Alterus. He recalls that Alterus only manifested when the 5 deadly sins gathered together. That means one thing. As things stand, Alterus will never appear. Alan finally speaks, stating calmly that there is no longer any reason to worry about Deus. Evan beams and adds that Deus is now widely acknowledged as being on the same level as Reinhardt, the first sword. That comparison gives Alan pause. Reinhardt is not a name given lightly. Alan wonders if perhaps he should have met Deus face to face at least once. Evan continues with the 4th report and speaks about Reini. He explains that she has become an appraiser, a rare specialist capable of analyzing artifacts and engraving them with black runes that greatly enhance their power. Alan is genuinely surprised. He mutters that he did not even know such a profession existed in this world. The idea fascinates him, and he feels quietly relieved. Then his expression shifts sharply. He asks Evan the question that truly matters. Did Raiden really become a pirate? Evan answers without hesitation. He asks whether Alan knows of the 7 archipelagos off the coast of Rexus City, infamous as the gathering place of the greatest pirates of the era. He then reveals the truth. Raiden has become the captain of the 1st archipelago, the largest and most powerful of them all. The words hit Alan like lightning. He leaps from his seat so abruptly that it looks as though invisible strings yanked him upward. He exclaims that it is impossible. A strange sense of déjà vu floods him as memories from his past life surface. He recalls an old internet joke about donating for years so Raiden could live an ordinary life, only for him to become a pirate. That joke has become reality. Tears well in Alan's eyes as he mutters that he never sent Raiden to Rexus to become a pirate. Evan remains composed and continues. He explains that Raiden has an exceptional talent for detecting enemies and navigating danger. More importantly, he reminds Alan that Raiden is a sea godkin, naturally attuned to the ocean and capable of moving freely through it. Evan adds that the seas around Rexus are filled with priceless relics from ancient eras. That is why he originally recommended that Raiden pursue treasure hunting, a profession of immense prestige and potential. However, matters escalated far beyond that. Evan explains that ruling an archipelago is no different from ruling a territory. A pirate captain holds absolute authority and immense political influence. Alan leans back, thoughts racing. He wonders how Raiden could have defeated the previous captain of the 1st archipelago. He knows the truth. Every archipelago captain is a superhuman who has never lost a naval battle. That leaves only one conclusion. Raiden must have discovered something extraordinary. Alan reasons that Raiden uncovered genuine relics of the old era, powerful enough to overturn the balance of the seas. In his past life, Alan himself spent countless hours chasing such relics in the treasure hunter minigame of this very world. He presses a hand to his forehead, utterly drained. He thinks bitterly that he always knew this world would never unfold according to his expectations. Even so, this outcome is not the worst. In fact, it is almost impressive. Letting out a long breath, Alan slumps back into his chair, completely limp. Evan rushes to his side and asks with concern whether he is all right. The scene shifts to the heart of the Principality of Korkia, the massive maritime city of Raxus. Endless sails crowd the horizon, and salt-stained stone lines the streets. Beyond the coastline lie the 7 pirate paradises, lands ruled by strength, blood, and greed. The most powerful among them is the first archipelago. It once belonged to Alcaride the Red Slayer, who secured the Heavenly King's protection through obscene wealth and tribute. His reign ended the day he was defeated. The one who struck him down was Raiden. Now Raiden stands on a rooftop overlooking the sea, wind tugging at his cloak as the sunset paints the horizon red. A faint smile rests on his lips, earned through blood and fire. He is now the captain of the first archipelago. Leaning against the wall, he cracks his neck and mutters that he still does not understand what the Great Moon truly is. He never cared enough to think deeply about it. At first, the Great Moon was simply someone he felt grateful toward, someone who altered his fate. He was meant to die as a vivisection slave. Because of the Great Moon, he met Utia. Because of her, his power awakened. In truth, he feels he followed Utia's will far more than the Great Moon's. Even when he was known as the Blue Moon, it felt less like faith and more like obedience to her guidance. So when the Great Moon issued a vague order about becoming a treasure hunter, Raiden could not understand its meaning. What did treasure hunting have to do with revenge? His thoughts darken as memories resurface. His clan once lived peacefully on a forgotten island, harming no one. Then the Black Things descended without warning and slaughtered them. Survivors fled, only to be hunted down by so-called hunters. His parents, exhausted and wounded, were butchered. Raiden was captured and sold as a slave. Standing at the sea cliff, staring toward a distant city glowing beneath the dying sun, Raiden clenches his fists. He does not believe that treasure hunting or receiving gifts from the Great Moon will fulfill his revenge. For now, he decides he will pretend to follow the order. As his gaze drifts across the sea, he notices a massive ship in the distance. Laughter echoes, fireworks explode, and celebration fills the sky. He frowns, then realization strikes. That ship belongs to the chosen captain of the 7 archipelagos. The same people who once hunted his parents. A voice boasts that only those chosen by fate can receive the Heavenly King's protection through wealth. Raiden's smile vanishes. His expression turns pitch black. So this is the truth. He mutters that the Heavenly King spreads lies deliberately. He knows the real source of their power. It does not come from wealth or divine favor. It comes from a secret ritual that requires the flesh of sea godkin. Only by sacrificing their bodies can one gain the power of the sea god clad. Every captain of the 7 archipelagos has performed this ritual. As laughter and fireworks continue, Raiden's breathing grows heavy. His eyes tremble with restrained fury as he realizes the final truth. Those hunters split his parents' bodies into 7.